Assembly Broadcasting to keep members in the spotlight for the next items. Are members aware of any apologies? No, okay.
Robin is going to be a little bit late. He has another thing that he can't just avoid this morning.
No problem. Thanks for that, Diane. Okay, then, agenda item 2 is Chairperson's business. Can I inform members that the Department of Education has responded to the Education Committee's request for an urgent meeting with the Education Minister on the current situation in schools, and further to our meeting with all teaching unions yesterday. The Education Minister has indicated that she is unavailable until the 12th of January. Can I seek members' views in relation to this response?
I just say, Chair, my thoughts would be like at short notice, and I know she has a busy schedule, that it's probably understandable enough. That'd be my personal opinion, if that's okay.
Okay. Anyone else want to respond?
Chair?
Yes. Pat, was that?
Yeah. I mean, given the crisis that's present in schools at the minute, you know, the reports we've had back from school leaders and teachers and so on, with the added ingredient of this Omicron variant being discovered here over the last day or two, and the potential it has for greater transmissibility and so on. It's, I think it's unacceptable that the Minister isn't coming in to brief us on what her plans are over the time ahead. I think it's quite disrespectful, to be honest. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair.
I agree with you. There's probably not a lot we can do about it. Thanks.
Thanks, Pat. I bring Daniel in.
I think it is disappointing that the Minister isn't in attendance. Chair, there are a number of significant and pressing issues that need to be addressed and which we need to divert the attention of the Minister to. I'm very sure she's aware of them, given that they've been going on for a number of weeks, but it does add to a further concern that we've all expressed around this table about how pressured the committee's time can be when it comes to the scrutiny of various bills, not just specifically in this committee, but in others, when then it can ultimately distract from other things that are happening that need our immediate attention and have needed our immediate attention for quite a number of weeks. As I said, there's only so many hours in the day, and this committee has been swamped in the last number of weeks and months, but it would have been nice, given the Minister hasn't been with us and that she has been, that we were dealing with this integrated education bill and other things. It would have been nice that she would have been courteous to attend this today. I think that it would have been important and sent a signal. After all, she hasn't been here for some time. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. Anyone else want to respond before I summarise? No? Okay. I agree with a number of members. We took evidence from all teaching unions in Northern Ireland yesterday, and there was a very, very clear message that there is a need for leadership and guidance around a number of key issues. Pat adds the issue of the detection of the new COVID variant in Northern Ireland as the top of that list, but also the issue of clear leadership and guidance around mass gatherings in schools was raised yesterday. Urgent clarity needed on ventilation. There is an observable, objective identification of a complete difference of opinion between the Minister, the Department of Education, and a number of people that have contacted me with regards to how many schools are requesting CO2 monitoring and air filtration devices. And that is consistently referenced as the CMO as a key mitigation against the transmission and infection of COVID-19. Perhaps the most urgent of all issue, however, was the staff shortage crisis in our schools for both teaching and non-teaching staff, and requests for administrative assistance with identifying substitute teaching and staff cover, and also clarity and update with regards to how the volume of substitute staff is going to be increased. I was provided with a screenshot of a school seeking a chemistry substitute teacher for A level since October, and have still not been able to secure that, and are now adjusting that request to a general science teacher or even a maths teacher. Now, I'm not expert to know what impact that has on the teaching received by the pupils, but it's not a chemistry teacher, and it's a teacher that has not been accessed since October. So there are some real urgent issues here. I think it was and is incumbent on the Education Minister to give a very, very clear public statement and public response to those issues. I think it is regrettable. I think it is disrespectful. I think it's a missed opportunity that we are affording the Education Minister to come and make that type of public statement to schools, parents, pupils, staff across Northern Ireland. And Clark, perhaps we can reflect on whether there is any other way to facilitate such a public response from the Education Minister if she is unwilling to do so via the Education Committee in December. I imagine, I would check, that we advised we would make ourselves available at any time that the Education Minister was available, given, as Daniel has said, the schedule that we have adopted in the most recent weeks, where I think we may have had 7 meetings in 7 working days at one point in time. That's our commitment to dealing with the issues that are in front of us at this moment in time. I don't know whether there are any other ways to facilitate a public response from the Education Minister via the Assembly. I think that's maybe something for us to reflect on. Obviously, it's not for the Education Committee as a whole to facilitate that. I don't think we could avail of committee motions at this stage. Business Committee has moved on, but whether there are opportunities for urgent requests for responses, etc. But if members are content, I propose that we respond to the Education Minister to double check that there are no available days or time in December for her to meet urgently with the Education Committee on these issues, and encourage her to do so, and for us as MLAs to reflect on whether there's any other way to facilitate such a response. I'm not being difficult here. I genuinely think there are some urgent key issues that our education community deserve a detailed response to. Are members content?
Chair, just
Clark, yeah, Clark.
I did ask whether I did say that the committee could meet the minister at any time in December.
Thanks for that. Okay, are members content with the thrust of that response then?
Yes, Chair, I'm content. Could I just add that, in asking the Minister to appear in front of the committee, we're simply using the committee as a conduit to relay the Minister's message to our schools and our students, parents and teachers in the schools about what leadership she proposes to give to the schools at this difficult time. It's apparent also that the Minister isn't appearing in the media either. She hasn't even given any public message, even without using the procedures within the Assembly through the committee and so on. So, I agree totally with Daniel. It's very, very disappointing. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Okay, members. Clark, yes, Daniel, go ahead.
Just to add to that, Chair, you've summarised that very well. It's we all agree around this committee, and the Minister agrees that it's essential for schools to stay open. So if we all want schools to stay open, we need to see immediate action to curb the levels of infection and the concern within the school environment, and also obviously the significant rise in the level of infection, which is leading to more and more staff going off. So this needs to be dealt with now. We're going to face a very difficult situation in the end.
Yeah, I think, like Pat and yourself said, we're trying to raise legitimate questions here, and I suppose I would say this as well. Obviously we agree. I think everyone agrees that attendance must be maximised, and however, attendance alone cannot be the measurement for success in this context. If indeed attendance alone is leading to a shortage in teaching and non-teaching staff, if attendance alone is resulting in non-subject specific teachers teaching specific subjects, and we haven't been able to get a clear response on that just yet, perhaps it is possible to reassure us that that is not a widespread issue. But I think those are legitimate questions, and it is our job to seek answers to them, and as Pat says, to work with the Minister to get messages and to get guidance out there. And so, we'll respond to that regard, and maybe there will be another way to offer the Education Minister an opportunity to respond to some of these issues. But Clark, I think the teaching unions were able to attend the committee at extremely short notice, given the emerging nature of some of these issues, some of whom include principals of schools. So I think I would encourage the Education Minister to consider that this engagement is not just with us; it's with principals, teachers, parents, pupils across Northern Ireland. That's the opportunity that she's turning down here as well. We are watched. Our facilitation of the feedback of teaching unions yesterday was covered widely. Had we not held that extra meeting, those issues would not be known. So that's the opportunity that we're affording. Clark, are you okay to respond in those terms?
Yes, Chair.
Chair,
Okay.
just briefly, and I don't want to be exhaustive on this, but just to supplement what you've said briefly, time is of the essence. Obviously, on around the 17th, children will be on their Christmas holidays, Christmas break. So I would hate to think there's going to be a situation where the Minister will just wait to that period and then do nothing, and then we're back to square one in January. We need to really press the Minister as to the urgency of this, to act and plan ahead, and to ensure that when schools do return in January, that we're in a much better situation than we are now. And obviously that reassurance is given to the wider school estate, being the teaching and non-teaching staff, and obviously parents and children as well.
Yeah, I'll bring Justin in a second, but absolutely, Daniel, the date that we've been offered for a meeting is the 12th of January, but these issues are pertinent now in terms of guidance around pre-Christmas gatherings, ventilation, staff cover. They're live and urgent now. Justin, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Very briefly, we did hear all the issues conveyed by the staff unions yesterday, and they were very worrying, and they need answers to those concerns. But the Omicron variant is here now as well. Tensions are going to be elevated. Teachers, pupils, and staff, we're not asking the Minister to come before us per se. It's to give reassurance, it's to give calm leadership, it's to give express empathy with what teachers, staff, and pupils have been through, to have recognition for what they've been through, and give them thanks for what they're doing, what they're continuing to do, and support them. So this is a very important message that the Minister needs to make to staff, pupils, and parents, and that's why she should come before the committee as soon as possible.
Agreed. Clark, okay to issue that response?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Agenda item 3 then, members, is draft minutes. Can I refer members to draft minutes of the committee meetings on the 1st of December at page 6 of your packs, and seek members' agreement that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Agreed? Agreed, members? Thank you. Thanks. Agenda item 4 is matters arising. Can I refer members to correspondence at page 2 of tabled papers from a teaching nursery school principal about difficulties accessing substitute teachers and CO2 monitors for classrooms. Exactly what we just raised. Can I ask members if they're content to include these issues raised in the correspondence that we will send to the Education Minister? Agreed?
Chair,
Diane, yes, go ahead.
in relation to the CO2 monitors, because there seems to be a disparity in the information that has been given, I presume, from EA, and the information that school principals were giving yesterday. Could we also, just the correspondence reminds me of it, write to EA or ask EA to come and see us and give us an exact, up-to-date line on the issue of CO2 monitors, of air filtration units, and the requests that have or have not been made, because there seems to be a discrepancy there as well by schools for these devices. But my information is that these devices are there, and I'm not understanding where this miscommunication or whatever it is, but needs to be ironed out of the system. And if we can aid that, then we should.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I said at the start, Diane, objectively, whatever one's, views are, there is a discrepancy. The Education Minister has very, very clearly made the argument that a small number of schools have requested CO2 monitoring devices. I suppose what I would like to know is what has the Department of Education and the Education Authority done to make those available, make their availability known, make it easy to access them. I think there are issues, and look, we're in December. We've gone a full term with little CO2 and air filtration device provision. So I think, look, whatever our starting point on this is, I agree with you. We need clarity around that. So happy for us to write to the Education Authority to get a bit more detail. I mean, if I reference this correspondence briefly for you to give you an idea. Firstly, the principal thanks us for facilitating our session with the unions and reiterates her desire not to see schools close, but emphasises that without adequate staff, face-to-face teaching for all pupils is impossible. It's logical, isn't it? The discussion raised on CO2 monitors then, the principal says, I phoned to request CO2 monitors for rooms in my school. I was told I could not have them for classrooms, only rooms with no ventilation. It was like being interviewed for the Secret Service, which was then followed up by another colleague to ensure I hadn't ordered any for classrooms. Why would we want to measure CO2 in rooms not used? This is just one example of the challenges faced accessing the monitors. The EA are telling the Education Minister we aren't requesting them. They aren't making it easy for us to get them.
And that correspondence is exactly why we need to ask EA what on earth are they doing around these things, and what is the information they're conveying. The Education Authority will be the people who will give them out, allocate them to schools, etc., etc. And therefore the Education Authority needs to answer to us as to on what conditions are they? Can we find out what are the list of conditions that they say must be prevalent before you can access a CO2 monitor? I mean, if it's a storeroom they're monitoring, it's not much point in it, to be honest. So let's write them or else ask them. Because we have enough committee meetings. Well, we seem to be doing committee meetings 3 times a week now. And we have enough committee meetings to actually say to them, hey, come on over and chat this through with us.
Absolutely. We've enough committee meetings for the Minister, the EA and everybody else that wants to come, given our prioritisation of the issue. The correspondence also raises issue in terms of gatherings that we were trying to seek answers to as well. correspondence says we respected the DE guidance last year that gatherings were not to take place. However, as far as I am aware, we have been told to risk assess for gatherings this year. I would not go against guidance from the Department of Education. I believe they have not issued information that we are not to have these gatherings, even by appointment only. DE need to clarify this information as a matter of urgency, as we are scheduled to have gatherings in the coming days. So there's clearly confusion around what the guidance is in relation to gatherings. Justin, the correspondence also thanks you for asking how our education community are. Fair play to you. Okay. Any other members wish to respond to that correspondence at page 2 of table papers? Or are you content to include the issues raised in our correspondence to the Education Minister?
Chris, can I come in quickly?
Nicola, yes.
Thanks. Yes, I think it's really important that we do raise those issues. I've worked very closely with that principal previously. She's part of my constituency, and we all know that those issues are very real and live. So I think it's really important that we do take the time to note that and to try and get the answers that she's seeking there from the Minister. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. Justin?
Sure. Just very quickly, in terms of the Omicron variant arriving here now and the worries and concerns about the heightened transmissibility of that variant, and given that there was a petition tabled by me to the Speaker to the Minister in relation to the track and trace in schools are probably going to be a little bit more on edge now. I think there needs to be a response to that petition from the Minister in relation to the track and trace process and protocols, just to give a bit more certainty to teachers, pupils, staff and parents alike. That petition started by Suzanne Kenny. I think it would be polite, to respond to that petition, but for the Minister to do so and for us to include that in our correspondence to her.
Okay. By my calculation, there are approximately 10 full days of school term left. I'm personally willing to make myself available on any of those days as soon as possible to meet with Education Minister, EA, CMO, anyone who wants to use the platform our Education Committee gives them to communicate with our education community. Okay, members content for that correspondence to go to the Education Minister? Agreed? Thank you. Okay.
Sorry, Chris, just so that I'm clear, we're also writing to the EA.
Okay, yeah, we can invite the EA as well.
But not just to come, to actually send us the criteria that they use to allocate CO2 monitors, the number of requests they've had, the number they've turned down, the reasons they've turned them down, etc., etc. So we can try to get some sense of it from the people who are actually doing it, and presumably passing the information to the Minister.
Clark, content to include that correspondence? Thank you. Thanks, Diane. Okay, agenda item 5 then. Sorry, Justin.
In terms of CO2 monitors, could we also include the same request on air filtration devices?
Yep, I'm taking that as read. That I always refer to CO2 monitors and air filtration devices. Okay. CO2 monitors alert people to poor quality. Air filtration devices address the poor air quality to some extent, obviously. Okay, thanks, members. Agenda item 5 then is correspondence. Can I refer members to page 13, where we have 12 items of correspondence and a summary note included at page 14. Clark, do you wish to speak to the correspondence, please?
Yes, Chair. Members, item 5.2 on page 17 is correspondence from the Department regarding the publication of the Department's business plan mid-year report for 2021-22. 2 action points are included in the correspondence which are not anticipated to be complete, and those regard the review of the Education Authority and shared education campus actions. So members, you may wish to write to the Department seeking clarity on the projects that are showing slippage or that are incomplete, and a briefing alongside budget issues as soon as that can be arranged. Obviously, if you're going to see the Minister, that would be an opportunity to raise the business plan as well.
Okay, members content to send that correspondence in advance to get clarity on those two concerning issues? Agreed. If members could give an audible agreed, that would keep us moving. Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thanks, Clark.
Item 5.3 on page 96 is correspondence from the department providing an update on the estimates restructuring exercise that's been undertaken by the department in the context of the ongoing review of financial processes. The new structure layout will be used for the first time in the 2022-23 mains estimate exercise. So similarly, that's something that maybe officials can update you about in a budget briefing. That's okay.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you. Item 5.4 on page 103 is a copy of correspondence from the Committee of Health to DE seeking information on how they provide access to information to people affected by hearing loss, sight loss, and other sensory impairments. So members, are you content to ask the department to copy its response to this committee as well?
Agreed.
Thank you. Item 5.6 on page 118 is correspondence regarding the stress and workload facing modern and foreign language teachers in schools. Are members content to write to CCA regarding the issues raised?
Yeah, and can we copy that correspondence to the Education Minister as well? Yeah.
Yeah.
Members content?
Agreed.
Okay. Justin, go ahead.
Yeah, just on the modern languages, has there been a response from the Minister? I don't believe there has been a response from the Minister to the Irish language speakers, teachers and organisations. If that correspondence was sent to her on the 7th of October, again, it would be polite for the Minister to respond to that important correspondence.
Okay.
We'll chase that, Justin. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Item 5.8 on page 123 is correspondence from Thrive seeking a meeting with the committee on a place-based community approach to reduce educational disadvantage. So the organisation is just wants to say to the committee how they work in line with the recommendations that have been made by the expert panel on underachievement. So members, are you content to ask for a written briefing initially on the work of Thrive, or would you like to arrange an informal meeting with the group?
Chair, we could start out with writing to them and hearing from them, but I think it would be good to see them maybe have an informal meeting with them.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harry.
Okay. Item 5.9 on page 124 is correspondence from Parenting NI, who are your witnesses this morning, actually, and they're seeking to present findings of another survey they've done, the Big Parenting Survey, and that will be released in February 2022. So members, that's another item that you can add to your forward work plan, time permitting.
Happy to do so. Agreed.
Right. Thank you, members. That's all I have.
Thanks for that, Clark. Okay, then are members content to dispose of the correspondence? Dispose is a unique word in this context. Might need to find a new one. Action the correspondence as per the summary note at page 14 with the above exceptions. Agreed? Justin?
Can we write to the teaching unions to thank them, as for our committee to write to the teaching unions to thank them and their members and all staff in education for the crucially important role they've played throughout this pandemic coming into the Christmas season? I think that would be just a nice recognition from us to them.
Agreed.
And Chair, you could have said worse than dispose. You could have said shred.
it is a meaning of dispose that includes action, but I could see how that could be misunderstood. No problem. Okay, members, thank you. Agenda item 6 is our forward work programme. Can I refer members to a draft forward work programme at page 149 of your packs? Let's get that now. And seek your agreement to endorse the forward work programme as amended. Clark, do you want to speak to the forward work programme there?
The only thing I would just bring to members' attention is that yesterday the business committee put 2 motions on the order paper on behalf of the committee. So that they'll be debated next week, and they are to ask for extension of committee stage of the period products pre-provision bill and the education curriculum, CPR and AED bills until the 2nd of February. So that creates then a need for us to, prioritise hearings about those bills as much as we can in the meantime. But it is obviously like a relatively short time period that the committee has to do that, given the end of mandate approaching.
Yeah, and on that note, Clark, perhaps worth alerting members' attention to our committee meeting tomorrow, 9 to 10:30, to receive evidence from Homeless Period Belfast and Period Poverty Action Group, two key stakeholders who have led the campaign for free period product provision in schools in particular. And then next Wednesday, our committee meeting is on special school area planning and a briefing from the panel on the independent review of education, followed by that Thursday, further evidence from Assembly research on the free period products provision bill, and another evidence session, SH. Clark, can I check what that stands for?
Is stakeholders, so we're trying to schedule a range of stakeholders from different perspectives.
So we're endeavouring to take as much evidence as we can there before Christmas recess, and we're scheduled to return, Clark, on the 5th of January. Yeah. Okay. If members could note those dates and ensure.
Chair,
Yeah.
Chair, sorry, just a minute. So I haven't checked up on all of the people that we're taking evidence from on the period products bill. But could I suggest that rather than leave it to the last minute, we do get some legal advice as to the implications of the bill? And could I also suggest that we take some advice, because I haven't found anybody yet who's given me any business case or rationale for the cost of the bill or the ongoing costs of the bill, and potentially the fact that the costs will accumulate year on year on year. So can we take some evidence perhaps from, I don't know, Ulster University, Gareth Hetherington, someone potentially who will tell us what the actual costs of the bill might be? I did ask the bill proposer, but that I don't think that there's a real business case done around what the costs of the bill would be.
Okay. I think there's some reference to some costs by the bill proposer, but those are.
I'm not sure that I think they're guesstimates rather than.
Okay.
Any real evidence? I mean, I'm not against the principle of this bill at all. I think in making good law, we need to know the costs that we're going to leave behind around it. So, and the legal implications as well, and that we should request the same clause by clause investigation and interrogation from a legal point of view as well.
No problem. I think we have requested that. Clark, could you respond to those two fair suggestions?
Yes, Chair. The sponsor did address the costings and referred to good practice in this jurisdiction and others on which his indicative costings have been based. And we have been writing to the departments who would be rolling this out. about costings for the pilot projects that they might have already have carried out. So that will give us some more definite information about cost. And in respect of the legal implications,
sorry, Evan, just can I come in there? I do think that we need to get something that's more formal around costs. And we can get the stuff from the department. I mean, when I was in the Department of the Economy, we set aside a considerable amount of money so that in colleges and in higher education, that there was no excuse not to have period products free to those who needed them. That already happens. I know it already happens in school, but the bill is wider in its scope than even just the departments of government. And therefore, we should get some formal idea. And I would suggest that we maybe contact the Ulster Business School and see if there is some more formal route that we can interrogate the cost.
Okay. I think we would probably need to have costs to get them to interrogate the costs for us. But you raise another fair point, though, Diane, in that this is beyond schools, and obviously we've written to the other committees. So I think a key evidence session is for the Department of Health to respond to the Health Committee, and I think we can emphasise the need for costs to be part of that deliberation as well. As you say, economy should have a good idea of costs, and the Department of Education should have a good idea of costs as well, given its pilot programming also. But I'm happy for our correspondents to contact Ulster Business School to ask if they could provide any assistance to us. I imagine legitimately there would be a cost to that as well, and I'm not sure if the Education Committee has a budget to cover those costs, but happy to make that request. Any other points in that regard? Or Clark, do you want to?
Just on the forward work plan, Chris. Yeah,
Robbie, go ahead.
Just looking at it while we're here now, Parentkind and I had the request in. Don't know if you covered the date, but their report's out on the 1st of February. Do you want to programme it now and just agree that so that it's in the reply? I think that as soon after they do the report, I think it's the 1st of February, Evan.
Yeah,
if we can agree that, then because we know what's going to happen in the new year, guys, that forward work plan is just going to become absolutely chock-a-block. And to be fair, the vast there, if that's okay, if we could do that.
Yeah, so the slight challenge, Robbie, is that the 2nd of February is down for a finalisation on our response to the period products bill, but perhaps a week soon thereafter would be possible, Clark.
Yeah. Last week we wanted to have Nikki present to both the Education and Health Committees together. That's still in the mix. And future schools, we've moved a couple of times now, from November up to January, and now up to the 9th of February. So with the 10th or 16th, Robbie, is that soon enough?
I think it's probably best making it a Wednesday, so 16th of February, perhaps, Robbie. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be moving into recess in a couple of weeks. Actually, I've heard it. I've got a few weeks after that. We're really. I think that's the case.
I think 16th of February is reasonable. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. Okay, Clark, is that forward work program?
Chair, on the forward work plan, one of the things that we had scheduled and it didn't happen, and I don't know for why, was the 14 to 19-year-old strategy. But the other big omission maybe you have done this, so apologies if you have, but during my time on the Education Committee, we have not looked at the impact of the pandemic on youth services and on the wider area of youth work. And I was over in the YMCA in Portadown recently, and when you talk to youth leaders, the impact is very, very great indeed. And it is something that we should consider as a matter of priority, talking to youth leaders about that impact on the young people that they meet every week.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, we have taken evidence on youth work and youth services, but it isn't obviously a key area of provision that I'd be more than content to programme again before the end of the mandate, Clark. If obviously EA are responsibility for youth services, and there are a number of other key organisations as well. We maybe, if members want to have a think about, in addition to the statutory provision delivered by EA, what other bodies they'd like to invite. I expect a long list. We'll find a way to work out how we rationalise that. But yeah, be content for that to be added to the work programme before the end of the mandate. Clark?
Yes, Chair, and I'll chase up what's happening with the 14 to 19 strategy as well, whether that's being decided now and can be presented to the Joint Committee.
Yeah, the reason, if memory serves me correct, was we had a session scheduled with both departments or both ministers, Clark?
And with officials, certainly from...
Yeah, we had a session scheduled with the Department of Economy and the Department of Education officials on the 14 to 19 strategy, and the departments cancelled, leaving us, I think, 24 hours notice, Clark, is that right?
Yeah, between 24 and 48.
24 to 48 hours notice. The departments cancelled on us, Diane, and actually left us with a void meeting day as a result of that. So
Chris, I know you're keen to reiterate all of this. I know this. I have no idea why it happened. So I'm not either defending it or anything else. I just think one of the most important things that we will be doing is preparing children for their future career, for jobs, and for growing the economy. And 14 to 19-year-old is a massively important piece of work.
Couldn't agree more. I proposed an inquiry into careers guidance in the former Dell committee. Share your passion. I didn't raise the issue today. I'm not keen to reiterate it, but if people are going to cancel on this committee, I'm going to make sure people know that's why this committee hasn't dealt with the issue, rather than through any lack of interest of our own. But I wholeheartedly agree with you, Diane. Such a huge, important area of provision, and maybe we can see a way to return to that evidence session before the end of the mandate as well. Thanks for raising that, Diane. Okay, members, I should move us on here if okay. Okay, Clark?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Agenda item 7 is our oral briefing from Parentkind on the school uniform survey. Can I ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove members from the spotlight and to add our witnesses? Can I refer members to the briefing paper from the committee clerk at page 156 of your packs, and the Parentkind Parent Engagement Group Northern Ireland School Uniform Poll Report at page 159. Can I welcome Jane Thompson from Parentkind and advise that we have 10 minutes for your opening statement, followed by questions from members, which can be answered across the panel. You're very welcome.
Good morning, Chair, and thank you for having me. I'm just going to share the screen here just to put up a short presentation for this morning. And if everyone could just confirm that they can see it okay.
Yes, Jane, we can see that. Thanks. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. So thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee, for inviting me today to share with you the findings from the school uniform survey that Parentkind and the Parent Engagement Group PEG undertook in August of 2021, between the 12th and the 20th of August. Of the 1,415 parents responding to the survey, 930 had children at primary schools and 787 had children at post-primary schools, with 437 having children attending both primary and post-primary schools. So this gave us a good insight into the challenges and the opportunities within both phases. Of the 1,415 parents that responded, it was on behalf of 2,771 children. We collected data from across all of the household income brackets, and 26% of the parents who were surveyed are in receipt of free school meals. Where the school uniform is obtained from, where parents were telling us, the primary source was from school approved supplier. This being at 93% for primary school parents and 98% for post-primary parents. With the other retail store or supermarket, then there was a greater difference there, with 63% of parents from primary school being able to source uniform items from the high street, in comparison to 48% of parents of children of post-primary age. With pre-loved and second-hand uniform, it was around the same 13 and 12% of parents were accessing uniforms from the suppliers, and 25% of primary school parents and 21% of post-primary parents were accessing items passed down from family and friends. Looking at the school uniform cost per child, this is where we're looking at the greater variation between primary and post-primary. For the raw school...
Sorry to cut across you. Can I just check? Are you moving through the slides there as you go as well?
Yes, can you see them okay, Chair and members?
We just have the title slide as it is at the moment.
Okay, I can see them here, so I'm not quite sure. Just how...
That's it changing now.
Is that it now?
Yeah, perhaps manually changing the slide would be helpful there.
Okay.
Because there's obviously rich information there, so thank you.
No bother. Thank you, Chair, for highlighting that. So the school uniform spend per child, again, as I go back to say, this is where we've seen the greater variation between primary and post-primary, with the uniform for the primary child on average costing £80 compared to £166 for the uniform for a child of a post-primary. The PE kit, again, equally huge variation, £28 for a primary school child compared to £105 for post-primary. Then the makeup of the rest, for the 173 total spend, 378 for post-primary was for school shoes and for PE kits. We asked parents as well about the impact, the financial impact that the school uniform cost had on them. Now, the top figures there show responding to yes, that it did put financial pressure on the family or across all of the income brackets, and that's right up to the over 75,000. So as you can see, is that 71% of primary school parents said yes, purchasing school uniform has placed financial pressure on the family, and 80% of post-primary parents said the same. But if I can just give you a little bit extra there, is that when we look at the household income bracket of between £65,000 and £75,000, 53% of parents with a household income within that band also responded yes to this question, that the school uniform puts financial pressure upon them. We asked the percentage of parents who are in receipt of a school meal, has purchasing the school uniform placed financial pressure on them, and you can see here of where the figures really jump. 95% of parents in receipt of a school uniform of children in a primary school said yes, it places financial pressure upon them, and 94% of post-primary parents. For the parents who are in receipt of school uniform grant, we asked them, has purchasing school uniform impacted on their health and well-being? And 90% of parents in receipt of a school uniform said yes for primary school age, and 88% said yes for those that have children in post-primary. If we go back again and look at the income bracket of 65,000 to 75,000, 30% of parents with a household income of 65 to 75,000 said that also the cost of school uniform has impacted upon their health and well-being. We asked parents then about the concerns around school uniform, and here I have broken this down into primary school parents. So if we look here at the top 5 concerns for the primary school parents, it's the cost of school uniform at 93%, reporting this to be of that they were very concerned or quite concerned. Needing to purchase new uniform due to growth spurt throughout the year, having to purchase uniform items from an approved supplier, the cost of PE kit excluding footwear, and the durability of uniform items. These were the top 5 concerns for parents of a child in primary school. If we move over to the post-primary, again, we can see here similar of where that it's the cost of school uniform, excluding footwear, actually coming out at 96%. So almost 100% of post-primary school parents are reporting that the cost of school uniform, excluding footwear, is concerning them. This was followed then immediately by the cost of PE kit, then for the needing to purchase new uniform and having to purchase school uniform items from an approved supplier. And 5th in for post-primary is having to purchase multiple PE kits for different sports, and that was at 73%. We asked then for other considerations then as well for parents and primary school parents as to how they agreed with the statements that we put to them. And top of the list, and this is something which we need to always bear in mind, is around the durability. At 96%, primary school parents are wanting all school uniform items to be quality assured to ensure that they are durable. Second on the list, other considerations for primary school parents is that blazers should be manufactured to enable hand and or machine washing. Parents again should be consulted on all proposed uniform changes and also their levels of satisfaction, and this was at 93%, where parents want to be consulted on school uniform. School uniform logos being available for parents to fix to plain uniform items, and that was coming out at 85%. And the 5th response from primary school parents is that there should be flexibility with uniform items, for example, the logo hoodie instead of a blazer. And if we actually even look back to the, just take back in case the members didn't see it, to the 4th slide here of where that we looked for the school uniform spend per parent, and we look at primary schools that the PE footwear is £24 on average and school shoes £41 per on average. And if we think about the flexibility and think the parents are asking us for that, if we could come with a universal set of footwear such as plain black trainers that would work as school shoes and work at PE footwear, this would very easily help to reduce that total spend there of £65 for parents. The other considerations for post-primary school, now top of the response again here and almost at 100%, at 97%, was parents are looking for blazers to be manufactured so that they enable hand or machine washing. And I'd just like to highlight, and I'm sure the members are already aware, is that this isn't having blazers which are hand or machine washable just doesn't impact on the cost at the time of purchase, but it's also the cost throughout the school year of actually having to dry clean blazers as well. Secondly, their parents are calling for all uniform items to be quality assured to ensure that they're durable, and again they too at 93% are wanting to be consulted on any proposed uniform changes and also levels of satisfaction with uniform. School uniform logos to be available for parents to fix onto plain items, and they also talk about the flexibility with uniform items, again logos instead of blazers. And we know that for many of the post-primary young people last year when this was allowed, it was much more favourable. If I could just as well highlight number 6 on the other consideration for post-primary, this is something that I was talking on a lot last week, and I know that it has been raised in the Assembly this week, and it's around all school uniform policies being gender neutral, so that, for example, girls can wear trousers, so that boys or girls can wear school uniform shorts in the summertime, and that was coming in there at 70%. So that is a whirlwind, Chair and members, of the report, and I'm very happy to take any questions on it.
Thanks for that, Jane. I'll move straight to questions and bring in Deputy Chairperson Pat Sheehan, MLA, please. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for that presentation, Jane. And I mean, the situation is getting out of hand. Prices are spiralling. Every September, more and more families are finding themselves in debt as a result of, they having to buy uniforms. And we really need to cut and cap the cost of uniforms and make grants more widely available. I'm just wondering, Jane, if you have any international examples of what other countries have done in this situation to address this issue, and is there anything we could learn from them? Thanks.
Thank you, Pat, for your question. I'm sorry, I don't actually have any other evidence internationally of how that other countries have actually addressed it, but I do pick up on your point is that every year, and going back this last 20, 30 years, is not just in this 5 years, is that August just brings that tsunami of additional stress for families when it comes to that school uniform time.
Okay, fair enough. And I suppose that's something, Chair, that maybe the Assembly research could look into, other examples of what has been done, whether it be internationally or in other jurisdictions here in these islands. I'm just wondering, Jane, then, I mean, what we really need here is some sort of statutory footing in terms of guidance for schools around uniforms. I mean, that's in addition to making uniforms affordable for families. So I'm just wondering, how do you think that statutory guidance would look like? And do you think it would be difficult to bring schools on board with this? Thanks.
Thank you, Pat. Well, the guidance currently issued to all Board of Governors is that they should be reviewing their school uniform policy on an annual basis, and we at Parentkind would very strongly recommend that, now in the months ahead before next summer, is that there is a robust review undertaken of the school policy for each school, because as identified within the survey, there are a number of very simple steps that a Board of Governors can take to actually address some of the immediate and pressing concerns for parents, for example, around the logo, and also working with the school uniform shops as well, because when we talk about a cap on the school uniform, we have to look at then who is actually going to absorb that loss of income. Is it going to be that there's going to be, if the uniforms are capped, is that the quality is going to actually be cut so as to ensure that they are affordable uniforms for family? That means then that there's having to be more repeat purchases throughout the year. Do we look at, for example, the SNP, Emma MP, who recently in Westminster actually suggested cutting VAT on school uniform items? That's obviously applicable for over age 14. So looking at such costs on that. But I'm sitting in East Belfast. I'm here today and I'm sitting in Carew. And we look at where that they have together actually joined as a community with the schools and with the Board of Governors and with the local businesses as well, school uniform suppliers, of where that they have planned payment schemes in place for parents throughout the year, where they have school uniform vouchers available. So for me, it's looking at the minute what we can do now in the immediate, instead of this rolling on to the next summer where there's nothing done, and we look at the Boards of Governors looking at finding local solutions to what really is a massive problem right across the whole of the north.
Yeah, and thanks for that, Jane. Although I suppose the point I'm trying to make is that there has been guidance there for quite a while, and it would appear some schools just continue to ignore that guidance, as they do around other issues as well. And on account of that, do you think there needs to be some sort of, the guidance put on a statutory footing so that it becomes law that, there has to be a cap on the cost of uniforms and so on, so that they become affordable for particularly low-income families?
I can't comment on whether it should be a cap, Pat, because I would want to go back out to parents the same as we did in England whenever Westminster brought in the proposal over the cap of the school uniform earlier this year. And I can't comment until I would have that evidence in hand from what the parents say, because parent voice is what needs to actually feed through here and inform whether an increase in the uniform grant or whether the cap would actually be a long-term solution to what has been a long-term problem. Because I'm just again going back, is that when we cut costs, very often that is cutting quality to actually get the cost, which is going to mean multiple purchases, and that would be my concern. So that's why I would want to lay out the whole picture. Now, anecdotally, I have asked groups of parents around the school uniform grant, and I have asked parents who are currently in receipt of the school uniform grant, is that should the school uniform grant actually be increased? And the automatic response from them was no, is that alone wouldn't cut it. And they referred back to tax credits, and they referred back to the restaurant vouchers for last year, is that when there is an increase and there's more money being made available for families in low income, is that very often the costs are put up on the other side. So the grant doesn't have the impact and isn't the support that it was intended to be. So for me, there needs to be, and I would welcome the Assembly, the Education Committee, as they did with the transfer test, actually taking a more fuller consultation piece with parents and pupils around the uniform grant and around the cap as well.
Okay, thanks for that, Jane. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Pat. Can I bring in Diane Dodds, MLA, please?
Thank you, Jane. I mean, that is absolutely fascinating, the survey and the detail in the survey. And as many of us know, it confirms much of what many of us already know, that school uniforms in July and August are an enormous burden on parents and very, very difficult for many parents to deal with, especially when they have maybe 2-3 kids going, and sometimes going to different schools, which really makes the burden all the greater. In terms of the school uniform grant, so just keep me right on this. If the school uniform grant was increased, would it impact on any benefits?
I am not aware that it would impact on any benefits, Deanne. I'm sorry, I cannot give you clarity on that, but as far as I'm aware, it shouldn't do.
Good. So all I'm saying, and I know there is a review of the system at the moment, and we'll wait the outcome. And like you, I would be happy for the Education Committee to take a fuller look at this whole issue, because I do think that it is something that impacts on every parent across Northern Ireland, but particularly when we want to open up educational opportunity. I would hate to think that people are held back from opportunity because of the cost of school uniform, and therefore I would be quite keen to see how we could address the issue in a more wholesome package of measures. So often I ask the question about the school uniform grant, because often if you do one thing, it impacts on a family in another way. That's just simply the reason I ask that. If you were to have a clean sheet, what would you do?
Well, if I was to have a clean sheet, goodness Diane, wouldn't we love clean sheets in a number of education issues at the moment? If I were to have a clean sheet on the school uniform, I would go right back to what parents, 93% of post-primary and primary school parents told us they want to be consulted. Making a decision at Board of Governors level regarding the school uniform is not inclusive and it's not fair. So it needs to have all of the stakeholders around the table, and that would be starting with the pupils. That would be starting also with past pupils there as well, if there is an alumni in the school, with the PTA and with the Board of Governors and with the staff, so that they understand is that what are the current challenges and what are the opportunities for within the school. Because one of the things, Diane, there that you sort of lightly touched on is that the fear of the cost of school uniform actually being a barrier to entry or to participation in education in some schools. And unfortunately, we are aware that that is happening in Northern Ireland. To give one example of that would be Regent House in Newtonards, where a number of years ago where that they identified is that that was an issue for a number of families that were not sending their children to the school because the cost of the school uniform placed too much pressure on the family. So the school worked together with the PTA within the school, and they set up a pre-loved uniform shop where that they actually take orders from parents and that they're able to supply items at the start of the year and throughout the year. That isn't just happening in Regent, that is happening right across the whole of the province. In Lisburn, in your own town at Minnie's hockey morning on a Saturday morning, I know that there are pop-up PE pre-loved uniform shops there, and the community halls that from Omagh right through to Belfast that are actually doing this. So when I say with the clean sheet going back, it starts off with a consultation in the school, the stakeholders that are directly involved in the day-to-day life in the school, and then they widen that out into the community. So it's bringing in the uniform suppliers, looking at planned payment schemes. We've got planned payment schemes for oil, we've got planned payment schemes for Christmas toys, we have here in East Belfast, we have where I live in Fermanagh, planned payment schemes also for uniforms. Let's look at that so that we're enabling parents to budget so that it isn't, and not, I mean again, because I keep referencing within the survey, this wasn't just the lower income families that was telling us that this was placing financial impact. It's right across the whole income bracket piece. So it's about consultation internally within the school, wider community, and looking at to come up with a solution that fits and ensure that it isn't, that the school uniform isn't a barrier.
And last question, Chair. Do you find that schools are willing and open to the consultation? For me, the biggest issue, I quite like the idea of school uniform because I do think that I would dread to think what on earth it would be like trying to get 3 teenagers out in the morning with 3 different sets of clothes or something. But so I think it is a useful tool, but I fear that in some schools, school uniform is also a barrier to education. And you talk about consultation. Does that happen in your experience?
Sorry, you're asking me, Diane? Sorry.
Yeah, does that consultation with parents, is that widespread, or does it just need to be a matter of good practice that schools start to do this?
I believe that it's that, we have a number of schools that are doing this really well, that can actually act there as a case study for the other schools that maybe are not quite sure where to start with it and how to undertake such a piece of meaningful and in-depth consultation, because it's across the pupil and the parent base as well, and it can't just be one without the other. It has to be both. And so for me is that there would have to be more pressure perhaps put on the Board of Governors to undertake a robust review and to act now before next summer, so that there are local solutions within every school put in place.
Okay,
thank you, Jean. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Can I bring Robbie Butler in? I realise he has a personal commitment that takes him away this morning. I'll bring Robbie and then go to Daniel. Robbie?
Brilliant. I really appreciate that, Chris. Thank you so much for that. Thanks, Jane, for the work of Parentkind. and PEG and Secondary School Students' Union of Northern Ireland. So these have worked collaboratively and done a tremendous amount of work. If I was to ask you, Jane, to encapsulate the overriding theme of the responses from parents, and just sort of try and give me that in a short sentence, because when I looked at the figures there, and you look at there is a disparity between those who have slightly more than those who have less. And certainly there's no doubt that those that are under most pressure are those that are already fiscally and financially challenged. What seemed to be missing there from the report was what we could do in terms of and statutory responsibility for ensuring those parents have the ability to not go for second-hand because they can't afford it, but to get something that is durable, long-lasting, and of sufficient quality and equal quality. And I go back to my own experience from when I was a child, very, very briefly. I knew that I was wearing a blazer which was of a lesser quality, and I also knew that my blazer had a sewn-on badge. It didn't have an embroidered badge, so I knew I was set aside from the start. And I was a child on the free school meals, and that wasn't a good feeling to start with, as an 11 or 12-year-old. So, in regard to how we tackle what looks to me, and you can tell me if it's any different, to be the critical issue here, that those who have less or already start off on the wrong foot, and if we don't actually adjust the grant at the same time of ensuring that the quality of uniform is the same, I'm not sure how we do that without just stepping straight into the elephant that's in the room.
Yes, and I agree with that, Robbie, as well. This is where that I have always said is that there is no one solution, there's no universal solution to addressing actually this problem. And yes, if the uniform grant was to be increased, just going back to what Pat said, if the uniform grant was to be increased, then that most definitely is going to help the families on low income. But to do that in isolation, without actually having that consultation between the community, between the manufacturers and between the retailers, is that you run the risk, as the parents that I have spoken to already have already identified. Like some of the parents told me is that when tax credits was introduced for childminding, is that their childminders actually doubled in cost overnight. Now that's going back, nearly 20 years ago now that happened. So what they were getting in one hand, they were giving, it was gone in another hand. It wasn't actually for them. So for me, it's about having that wider discussion, and then yes, possibly increasing the uniform grant so that it will be of benefit and meaningful benefit there coming through. But coming through, each and every single income band across is around durability and quality assurance of uniform.
Can I ask, and this is no way criticism of all the hard work that went into the survey, it really isn't, but was there ever a thought to actually ask parents, did they think that school uniforms is a good thing? And I'm with Diane on this, by the way. I do believe that it offers that sense of identity, that sense of pride, and also a uniformity, to use the word, but also if you displace that by having that varying degrees of quality. But why was there not a question in there to ask, do parents still believe in 2021 that uniforms are a good idea?
Well, it's always great post a survey, Robbie. You can always come up with at least 5 questions that you wish you had have asked. But one of the questions one of the considerations as well, maybe that I could link to that slightly for you, is that we ask parents about do non-uniform days place an additional strain on the family. And 44% of parents of a post-primary child agreed that it did place additional strain on the family, the non-uniform days. Now, I'm with Diane actually on this, and I know you and I are near enough of the one age as well of having the children through, of where I actually would have thought that would have been higher as well, because for me the non-uniform days, whenever you've daughters checking the phone that they didn't wear that last top the time before and so on, so that's the only thing that I have that I can give you some indication, but not a clear, concise answer on that.
Grand, okay. And in terms of potential solutions, obviously we have to talk to everybody. So the stakeholders are also the manufacturers.
Yes.
And in terms of establishing a benchmark, is there a benchmark you think that exists for that durable product, but also conforms to all the other regulations that is available? I mean, because if we want to complete the circle in this, we need to be reaching for things that are kind of available. Has there been any market research done?
I'm not sure if there has been any wide market research done, but again, Robbie, I could go back to White Abbey Primary School PTA there, of where they went out and undertook research with local manufacturers, and they actually have set up an agreement with a manufacturer there, and the school uniform is sold directly from the manufacturer to the PTA, who are then selling it on to the parents with little or no markup on the items. But that is all that I actually have. And the only other is personal experience of where that I have used school uniform manufacturers actually for the running club and for items there as well. And I would be happy to stand over any that I actually used for that.
Brilliant. Chris, thank you so much. And Jane, thank you for your time this morning. And happy Christmas if I don't see you.
And the same to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Robbie, good wishes for your important personal event today. Thanks.
Appreciate
all the
that.
best.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. God bless.
Daniel McCrossan, MLA, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the special treatment of Mr. Butler there. I can understand they can be a wee bit sensitive at times. Jane, thanks very much for the presentation. Very helpful, very detailed as well, and some very interesting facts and findings in it. I'll go straight to questions because I know we're tight for time. So we're all well aware of the reports of soaring uniform costs and parents having to go into debt to fund these uniforms, as other members have already indicated. Indeed, 94% of parents reporting uniform costs was a concern to them as a startling figure. And in this constituency, I hear of that on every single year. The parents are struggling. Is there a way that regulations around uniforms could reduce costs and maintain quality? And what would your top 3 asks be in that regard?
Goodness, my top 3 asks. Well, I again go back to what Diane said, Daniel, is that it is around consultation first and foremost, because ensuring the quality insurance, ensuring the quality assurance of the items is vital. But even looking at the simple things what parents said and asks around blazers being manufactured so that they can be hand washed or that they can be machine washed as well. There's things like that, but consultation is key first and foremost, and that will actually then produce the other 3 that you would be looking for.
Okay, yeah, that's very good. I agree with you there. Is this mainly a post-primary problem in your opinion, Jane, or are there issues at primary level as well?
There are issues at primary level as well, because if we go back again and look at the actual results of what parents said and the concerns over the cost, it was exactly the same, or there was only a few difference. It was over 90% for primary school parents as well as for post-primary parents. Now, we know that they're able to purchase more items on the high street, but the parents of primary and post-primary are equally reporting, and obviously their uniform grant is much smaller in comparison to the post-primary parents as well, Daniel. So they're not getting the same amount of money in the uniform grant to start off, so they're having the same percentage of challenge.
Yeah, and equally, I suppose, younger children tend to, mess their uniform more than those at post-primary, and there's obviously other challenges with children growing so quickly and the difficulties that presents, so I can completely understand the concern in that regard. I know my own sister is constantly running to replace jumpers and trousers and even shoes for her 2 boys, so I know that there are pressures there. Is there guidance that could be issued in relation to quality? I know you've touched on washing of blazers, etc., making them much more, I suppose, user-friendly, to put it mildly. What would that regulation look like, or how could that be shaped?
Well, I think is that the guidance again has to be coming directly to the Board of Governors, and I'm sorry, Daniel, because I'm sounding like a broken record again. The guidance is there from the department with the Board of Governors, but they have to review it and not just tick it off as that's okay, let's go, because sometimes is that, and I'm not broad brushing all Board of Governors with this, but there is that perception is that school uniform is around the colour and the shape and the make of what that the young people are actually wearing. It is more in depth than that. It is about quality insurance. It is about the cost. So that's for me of where that they have to take a robust review, and it needs to start now.
Okay, and just further to that, Diane asked a very important question about how it affects benefits, etc., etc. What's your opinion of the current uniform grant? Every parent most parents that I've spoken to that receive these grants are saying they're insufficient. And what about the eligibility criteria surrounding the grant? So, for instance, there's young people whose parents are on benefits that are unemployed that are entitled to the grant. But equally, there's young people whose parents are working but could fall under the category of working poor, that are struggling, they're having to pay everything and are really finding it very difficult. And these grants are often not sufficient.
And that's very true, Daniel, and that's where again that I would welcome if the Education Committee undertook consultation in the same level as others before, because the working poor is the band that is actually really suffering here. And if I just even refer back to what the SNP member actually suggested was the removal of VAT from school uniform for the over 14, and you look at the cost of £166 for the cost of a school uniform for a post-primary child. Now that's over £30 that would be reduced on if VAT reduced by if the VAT was to be extracted from that. So for me, the uniform grant, yes, does need to be looked at that, and I very much welcome that the review is being undertaken, but I understand that isn't going to be completed for a while, and that is why we need to look at immediate solutions, because we don't want another 2 summers going by depending and hoping for an increase in the grant and other support mechanisms.
The removal of VAT is an interesting suggestion, Jane. I think that is worth looking at and would be helpful in many instances, just particularly if a family have 4 or 5 kids to clothe for school. Free school meals is the only criteria that gets the grant, so there's a significant challenge in there, and that a lot of families that are living on the breadline will struggle to qualify for these grants. So it is absolutely something that needs to be reviewed. You have my full support. I think that the presentation that you have provided today has been hugely helpful. Certainly has drawn my attention to quite a number of areas. And I want to thank you all again for the tremendous work that you do and continue to do. This is very, very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks,
Daniel. Okay, can I bring in Nicola Brogan, MLA, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Jane. It's great to have you here, and it's great to get your findings there from that survey. As Daniel just said, really, really important findings. And it's something that it's a real live issue, and something that's affected all of our constituents. And it's something that it's been brought to our focus. I suppose at the start of the school year, most recently, and will be made worse as well because of the cost of living crisis at the minute and the soaring prices of energy and all that there. Like household budgets are already tight, so I definitely think it's something we need to be looking at quickly, and just also I think it's a good example of having parents involved in the conversation and consultation around that there. Obviously we need to be talking to school children, and school is not there too, but it's really important that we include parents in that there conversation. So it's just a perfect example of that there, but overall they should be involved in the education conversation. I'm just going to move on to some questions, Jane. First of all, do you think that uniforms can potentially affect parental choice insofar as parental choice and educational outcomes, insofar as maybe more expensive uniforms or expensive school uniforms can put parents off applying for a certain school for their child?
Anecdotally, I have heard from parents throughout the years in this job, and that's what I gave the example of recently or into an earlier on the meeting to Regent House, of where that they within their community were acutely aware, as parents had reported to them, is that their children couldn't join because the cost of the school uniform and PE kit, and that is where the PTA then swung into action alongside the school at looking at providing that that more affordable route for school uniform. And something is that as well, and I know that Robbie touched on this earlier around pre-loved, is that we also, and Daniel talked about repeat washing during the week for primary schools, is that pre-loved uniform isn't just, doing for those that are looking, for a more affordable route for uniform, but it's also around the sustainability piece as well, actually, for having them, instead of having to put on the washing machine midweek for the school jumpers, but by having those extra jumpers there from pre-loved. But in short, yes, I am aware of it, but I haven't undertaken any study to understand the depth of the barrier that it is, Nicola.
Okay, Jane, thanks for that. I think another point just coming from that there is also the importance of children and young people being involved in the climate change kind of action plan, and about recycling clothes and recycling uniforms, and it's another part that we should be focusing on as well. But finally, I just want to ask you about the guidance on uniforms and gender neutrality. I know it's been raised very recently with girls at school not being allowed to wear trousers, especially in the winter months. But I think we've heard from a youth group months ago now about girls, even when they're on their period and wanting to wear trousers and not having to wear skirts. So what are your views there in that regard? Should girls be allowed to wear trousers when they feel it's appropriate?
Well, if we go back again to the survey, is that, again, it was one of the top 5 responses is that there should be flexibility around school uniform. And the example that we gave there was that girls should be able to wear skirts. And again, flexibility, as I highlighted earlier, black trainers instead of shoes and trainers for primary school. But I would absolutely agree. And as I've spoke on it last week regarding these skirts as well, is that we take, one pair of tights, of where that there is a specific colour that the tights are not available on the high streets for family, and they're having to go to the supplier, and it's a 40 or 60 denier tight, and in this weather having to wear layers, they could have up to £20 on their legs and tights underneath the skirts in order to keep warm. So absolutely in line with what the survey said, school uniform policies should be flexible so that girls should, if they wish, be able to wear trousers, and equally boys shorts in the summertime as well, or girls wear shorts.
Yep, absolutely, Jane. And even back to that, just reminded me, in our school, it was you had to have certain cream socks on with your skirt, and again, you couldn't just get them in a normal shop. It had to be the exact supplier. So I agree with you there. Jane, thanks so much. Really appreciate all that there, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Nicola. Can I bring in Justin McNulty, MLA, please?
Thanks, Chair. Forgive me. Thank you, Jane. How are you? Listen, thank you very much for a very measured, balanced and informative presentation. And you spoke about a whirlwind. You described your presentation style as being a bit of a whirlwind presentation. And what many families, parents are experiencing is a whirlwind. We saw Storm Barra yesterday. Families and parents are experiencing the whirlwind of spiralling energy costs, spiralling cost of living, spiralling grocery costs, all prices going up. So that whirlwind that they're experiencing is horrendous in many cases. So we're talking here about the cost of uniforms. I want you to tell me, from your experience and from the survey information that you've acquired, tell me about the human cost in relation to the impact of the cost of many uniforms for schools, parents and families.
Yes, well, as I reported on, when we asked the questions, it has a place financial impact, and if the parents had responded yes, we asked have the cost then impacted upon their mental health as well. And what really got me, Justin, is that right up to that high income bracket is that we had, such a large percentage of parents actually telling us that it did impact on their mental health and well-being, the cost of school uniform. It wasn't just the lower income brackets, and that is why that I keep harping on that we need to find local solutions to support every family, because We know the impact that it's having of where that there are young people that they're not getting days away during the summertime, they're not getting summer holidays, they're not getting maybe some of the other things that other children can because uniform is taking priority over that. Even coming now up to Christmas is that families will be, having again to buy extra pieces of uniform for growth spurt and going back into the new year again. So, we haven't really got under the skin of the full impact that it's having, but what we have been told is that so openly by the parents across the income brackets is that the cost is impacting on their health and well-being. And if it's impacting on the parents, then it's impacting on the children because what the parent's suffering, the child is suffering as well.
That's disturbing, Jane. That is disturbing. And 68% of parents surveyed are very concerned about the cost of school uniforms. That's 7 out of 10 parents surveyed. What's the human cost of that to themselves, to their families, to their children? Really, really
Yes.
worrying.
And the thing is too, Justin, is that when a child presents in school on the 1st of September, they're presenting with a lot of that stress that the home has been feeling over August. So they're coming in with mental stress and baggage the minute they arrive through the door just by the cost of the uniform.
Really, really disturbing, especially in the run into Christmas, thinking about that impact on children and families. It's really worrying. And you told us about the guidance about the guidance, the issues to schools, and the approach of that guidance is, or the policy of that guidance is to ensure that the policy is fair and reasonable in practical and financial terms. Is that ringing true? Is that what the reality on the ground is?
Well, Justin, I think that as well. I don't want to go on a blame laying, position either. But as you can tell, I'm at the other side of where that our children are through school. But in all the years of our children being at school, I was never once as a parent actually consulted about school uniform, and there were school uniform changes within that time, and I was never once consulted about the changes nor about my level of satisfaction with the actual uniform. So the guidance is there, and many of your colleagues have said before, is that does there need to be stronger reinforcement of the fact is that governors actually sit up and start now talking about the people that their policy is actually impacting upon. And that's the parents purchasing it. That's the girls that are having to wear the skirts of where the skirts are a policy. It really is time that every single Board of Governor sits up and takes the example from many others that are actually doing it already. Start the consultation and start to bring about change and stop having this stress on families for this August coming.
Very, very well made point, Jane. And 93% of parents want to be consulted around school uniforms. It's incredible that isn't the case already. It really is incredible. And boards of governors need to step up and to take note. And Nicola made a very, very important point, and something we should put more emphasis on, and that is in relation to climate change, the environment, and recycling and upcycling. Boards of governors can step up on that regard and play their part in terms of emphasising the availability and the options around recycling and how they encourage parents and families to use recycled uniforms as opposed to buying new clothes all the time, because we have an issue. One of the major climate concerns is around fast fashion, and schools can play their part in bringing around that change that we all need to embrace going forward. So Jane, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Harry Harvey, MLA, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Jane. Absolutely amazing survey, some detail there and some very interesting figures. But one thing, we don't think no uniforms, that would never be an option, because I think that would increase the burden on parents and guardians by a long shot. I mean, having to, what people are like with designer stuff and all. The recycling end of it, I always thought was a brilliant idea, but I know sometimes there parts of uniforms get worn out more than others, so it's not always ideal. But principals of the schools they're obviously overloaded at the minute with other duties, and to expect them to take over another thing would be difficult. So I think these pop-up ideas are amazing, or even maybe non-teaching staff taking to do. But I think information sharing is a problem at times, because there's a lot of people out there with good stuff and willing to give it up to be used again, but the service isn't there, or not always taken up. I know this year I had asked and tried to help arrange, because of COVID they couldn't, and there's always different reasons, but I do think it's a good idea. I'll just go through all my wee points because I know time's moving on, and then you can come back to me, Jane, if that's okay. The blazers, and you're talking about machine washable ones and all, would that not make them a lot more expensive to start out with? Would the not the costs go up? And I know the VAT, that's certainly very inviting, but I know on things before, whenever the cost took off for some reason, then the supplier will be quick to put the price up. Like that's the thing. The benefits will not always go to the point where it's needed. I think that's pretty much it. If you can come back to me on those wee points, it'd be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Harry.
Thank you. Thank you, Harry, for that. I was trying to do the maths there, and I didn't want to miss what you said. So going back to the sustainable uniforms and the pre-loved, so and I'll let you do the maths. So our daughter is currently 22. Whenever she was in P6, is that I was part of the PTA, and the Eco Schools Committee in the school actually approached the PTA and put forward a business case that they wanted us to fund a resource. So putting it back onto them, we actually helped them set up a pre-loved uniform stall, and they rolled that out at their summer fairs every year. So that was the Eco Schools Committee in the actual school doing it. So it also broke the stigma of where one parent wasn't on to another parent to be seen to actually lifting it. But it is more about getting the message out there, is that it's not pre-loved or second-hand uniforms. It's about doing your piece for the environment as well. As Daniel said, when you've got a young child, is that you possibly have 5 jumpers a week to actually keep them going, and that's you putting on the washing machine. And as Justin has highlighted, the rising cost in energy costs, well, the more that people can start to think about sustainable uniform and actually about providing and receiving uniforms from pre-loved shop, they help to reduce their own energy costs by having to put the washing machine on during the week just to have school uniforms. So I do think that there needs to go a wider piece of communication out there around the eco benefit of actually using trousers. I know that whenever our daughter I was delighted I got a pair of brand new trousers out of the stall with the label still on. So there really is, and I feel good giving back again, and I always have done. Regarding the blazers, to make them machine washable so that they're not dry cleanable, that's changing the fibre, the makeup in the blazer, and normally dry cleanable is wool, so that's where the cost actually goes up. So by making it hand washable or machine washable, then it's bringing it back down to polyester mixed with cotton, and that the cost is reduced then automatically, and obviously then you don't have the ongoing cost throughout the year for dry cleaning. But going back to quality assurance, we do know is that right across Northern Ireland is that there are a range of blazers and a range of quality in blazers, because I know in one school of where parents buy 2 blazers per child at the start of the school year, and the blazer is less than the cost of a jumper in other schools, but because of the quality of it, it ends up with a very shiny lapel and shiny pockets, and the parents don't like the young people going out of a photo shoot or they're representing the school or so on. So the quality assurance is vitally important there as well.
Yep. I mean, a few wee points. Just the PTA, excellent. That would be perfect and certainly easily doable. But again, as you said, it's down to communication. I mean, there's going to have to be some input from the headmaster's guidance to do it, but that would be excellent. You're saying the change in material from wool. The worry to me, and that would be, in this day and age when there's more ventilation, the blazers are going to be cooler. There's not going to be as much heat in them. that could be an issue as well, because obviously we need quality and we need something that keeps our children warm rather than just looks good and is washable. Would you have a point on that?
Yes, I do have, Harry, and that goes back again to the flexibility around the uniform items. And we know that the former Education Minister, that he wrote to the schools after children returned after the last disruption to schooling period in the springtime, is so as to allow that flexibility, because again it's ventilation, windows open, and also the repeat washing, so as to repeat wash the blazer and trying to get dried. And that's where a lot of young people, not in every school, but in a lot of schools, that young people were able to wear their hoodie instead of actually wearing their blazer to school. So that had multiple benefits, and young people loved that generally.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, keep them warm and healthy would be the main thing at the minute, really. It's most important. But that's okay, that's great. Thank you very much, Jane. Thank you for all your work. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Harry. Thanks to all the members for the question, Jane, for that really powerful presentation. Just to bookmark some of the key points that you raised there then, Jane, in terms of those average costs, primary £173 per year and post-primary £378 per year. £378 on average. It is a startling figure, but it doesn't come as a complete surprise to me, as a parent and as an MLA who engages with parents on this issue of school uniform. £378, Jane, yeah?
Yes, very, very scary. And it's 105 for the PE kit alone out of that, Chris.
And that doesn't surprise me either. These results are obviously building on work that the Children's Commission did in 2017, where in addition to some of those startling total costs, Children's Commissioner found disparities between types of schools as well. Children's Commission cited a 25% premium for grammar uniform and a 51% premium for grammar PE. Is that something that your survey encountered?
We didn't encounter that, because it's not, although we collected the phase of the child was at, we didn't collect the type of schools, so we're unable to actually delve down between selective and non-selective schools in terms of the impact and what the cost was there.
Okay, and to put it in perspective, that £378 average cost for post-primary uniforms, the post-primary grant, we've got the department next and we'll obviously discuss this with them, but the post-primary school uniform grant in Northern Ireland is either 73 or 78 pounds. Does that sound consistent?
Yes, It doesn't even cover the PE kit.
I mean, that's a significant discrepancy between the grant and the average cost families are incurring, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes it is, but it's about finding the local solutions again, Chris, and I know I keep harp on and saying this, but if we look at the VAT, for example, if that was to be removed from that bracket there alone, that would be a massive benefit to start off with, but also even looking as well in terms of the PE kit, and I know that within the all-party group, yourself and other members, we've talked about this, is that why is there the need for actually the PE kit at the cost of what that there is currently? Could there not be something simple like a plain training PE kit for regular lessons, and then could there be a kit that would be funded by the PTA that if young people were going out to represent their schools at a team sport?
Yeah, I mean, it's startling that we're still asking these questions in 2021, Jane, given the amount of work that has gone over the years. I know you don't want to be drawn. I'm not trying to draw on you, but I think it's hard to conclude otherwise that the non-statutory guidance is not working. It's not working, and costs are too high for far too many families. Look, Jane, just in closing, this is why I'm I think this shows the centrality of parental participation in education. Parents, families play an absolutely vital role, and we have to include, consult families and the pupils, obviously, in education. And that's why I was passionate about helping to establish that all-party group on parental participation in education. And I would indulge this opportunity to encourage MLAs to continue to participate in that all-party group, and certainly going into the next mandate as well. Education doesn't happen without parental participation, and this is one key issue where we need to hear their voices and help them in response to these key findings that have been presented today and previously by the Children's Commission and other organisations. Thanks so much for all your work in that regard, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members.
Okay, can I ask broadcasting to remove witnesses from the spotlight and to bring members back into the spotlight, and to ask the clerk to summarise actions or requests, although I am conscious that we have the Department of Education waiting to come into the spotlight, and I imagine our final actions may result from what we hear or don't hear from the department shortly. Clerk?
Yes, Chair. Obviously, the conversation will now take over into your next session with departmental officials, but some of the issues that came up there were really fascinating. I mean, the comprehensive detail that was provided by those survey results, and even then, there were still more questions that could be answered. The idea of not having VAT on uniforms was mentioned a couple of times by Jane. Members really responded to the ideas of pre-loved and recycling of school uniform, and the need for schools to provide sustainability options. The role of the Board of Governors then in rolling out response to this, and an annual response to guidance and early consultation with parents was emphasised as well, and those are issues that members might want to continue to take up now with the department.
Okay, members? Yep. Okay, thanks for that, Clerk. We'll return to those actions to confirm them after our session with them. Can I ask broadcasting to remove members and add our witnesses for a briefing from the Department of Education on school uniform policy? Can I refer members to a briefing paper on page 5 of table papers from the Department of Education? Department of Education response on school uniform policy, dated the 27th of July 2021 at page 172, and a raised briefing on school uniforms, cost, gender and behavioural considerations at page 176. Can I welcome Margaret Rose McNaughton, the Director of Transport and Food in Schools at the Department of Education, and Jill Fitzgerald, Head of Food in Schools Team, Department of Education. You're both very welcome today, and we can give you up to 10 minutes for opening statement before discussion and question with members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Well, as you said, I'm Margaret Rose McNaughton, and this is my colleague Jill Fitzgerald, who leads on the school uniform policies. I think we're all really concerned at around the costs of school uniforms and the difficulties that this can bring to families. And I think Jane gave a very sobering presentation there as to the impact that the cost of these uniforms actually has on families. We know that school uniform policies aren't covered by legislation, and that it is currently a matter for school principals and boards of governors to determine. And the guidance from the department was issued for the first time to schools in 2011. We reissued it again in 2018 just to draw attention to some of the issues particularly around costs. And then, the guidance does advise schools that their uniform policies have to be fair and reasonable, or should be fair and reasonable in terms of practicality and cost. It also advises that schools should consult widely when drawing up a uniform policy. And clearly from Jane's presentation there as well, that is something that's going to be absolutely crucial going forward. There was a number of other elements part of the current guidance. such as being mindful of religious beliefs and equality legislation. Those issues should also be considered. And as I said earlier, I mean, this guidance is advisory. There's currently no legislative remit for the department really to intervene on the issue. But there has been a wide range of recent reports outlining the costs of uniforms, and we have been very aware of this over the last couple of years, which is why the review has just begun into the uniform grants and into free school meals. But one report in particular from the credit union, which issued in July of this year, I mean, it was a really sobering read because it showed that parents were spending around £886 on uniforms for primary school children and over £1,000 for post-primary. So, I mean, clearly that is an exorbitant amount for any family to have to fork out in the month of August for children going to school. But that credit union report also focused on the cost of expensive and branded PE kit. And
Margaret Rose, sorry to cut across you, but I don't normally do that. But I just these figures are obviously really, really important. So the credit union figures in terms of 886 and 1,000, is that an extrapolation of total family costs? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Just.
Right,
I guess it's really helpful to bookmark that, because obviously we're startled by the £378 per child. But I think that's a really important point you've made there, actually, to extrapolate that there will be an average cost per family, not just per child. So I just thought it was important to clarify that and let you proceed with the PE costs as well. Thanks for that.
Okay. Well, I mean, clearly from the information that Jane has as well, I mean, their costs are around £173 and £378 for post-primary. And the rate of the uniform grant that is currently provided by the Education Authority, it is £35.75 for a primary school pupil, £51 for a post-primary school pupil under 15, and £56 for a post-primary or special school pupil over 15, with an additional amount of £22 for a post-primary or special school pupil for the physical educator, the PE kit. It's important, I think, to say that the uniform grant was always intended as a contribution to the cost of uniform, and it wasn't designed to cover the entire costs. But clearly, the difference between what the uniform grant can provide now and the cost of uniforms, more generally, I mean, the gap is widening year on year. And I think the information that we've just received from Parentkind just, really focuses in on that. And just on that, actually, Minister Michael Bean visited White Abbey Primary School to discuss that joint survey by Parentkind and the Parent Engagement Group. And, she's very aware, obviously, from that meeting that the growing concern from families around the cost of uniforms. So taking all of that on board, you may be aware that the previous Minister, Peter Weir, announced a review into free school meals and uniform grant eligibility criteria, and that work has already begun within the department, as well as looking at the eligibility criteria. But we do intend to look, among other things, about options for the uniform grants, the current rate of uniform grant as a contribution to the actual costs, but then also look at some of the issues that Jane raised there, which I find really helpful and really interesting, around how we can encourage, parents to look at, pre-loved or recycled, and that's maybe around the language that we use around, rather than saying second-hand or used, that we start to talk more around recycling. And I know children, particularly children, are, very much focused on sustainability and climate change at this point. So I think there's something about the language that we use around that. But as part of the review that we've just started, we are planning a number of working groups to form them, to be formed from interested parties, and a wide range of stakeholders will be consulted prior to actually going out to formal consultation. One of the big issues for us, and I think has been mentioned a number of times by the members as well, is around the whole legislative issue. and the recent legislation that was introduced in England on school uniforms. Now, we will obviously continue to monitor the impact that legislation is having as part of our review. And as part of our review, we will be giving consideration to putting uniform guidance on a statutory footing. The statutory guidance, the legislation that the Department for Education in England provided in, was it June when the guidance went through? The statutory, the Act went through, and it then suggested that guidance would be provided by the Department for Education in England, and they did issue that guidance on the 19th of November. Now, having gone through that guidance, the guidance that they have issued, it is statutory, but that is practically the only difference between what we already have out as non-statutory guidance and what is now out on a statutory basis in England, because they talk about things like parents shouldn't have to think about the cost of a school uniform when choosing which school to apply to. And I know that Jane did allude to the fact that some parents would consider the cost of a uniform before applying to particular schools. So, we would like to re-emphasise that in any revised guidance or policy that we're providing, that parents should not have to think about the cost. Therefore, schools need to ensure that their uniform is affordable. In considering costs, schools will be asked to think about the total cost of school uniforms. That's taking into account all items of uniform or clothing parents will need to provide while their child is at school, and the family costs around that. Schools should keep the use of branded items to a minimum, and a school's uniform policy should be published on the school's website, be available for all parents, and be easily understood. Again, then the English guidance suggests that schools should ensure that their uniform supplier arrangements give the highest priority to cost and value for money, and this is where the quality and durability of the garment comes in. They give guidance on single supplier contracts being avoided unless regular tender competitions are run, where more than one supplier can compete for the contract and where best value for money can be secured. And then now the English guidance actually talks about second-hand uniforms, that schools should ensure that second-hand uniforms are available for parents to acquire, and that information should be clear for parents of current and prospective pupils and published on the school's website. And then finally, schools should engage with parents and pupils when they are developing their uniform policy. Now, that guidance actually falls short of mentioning a price cap, and I'm sure we all realise why that is likely. You would have to probably increase that cap year on year if costs went up. But in looking now and starting our review, we're very clear that we want to engage, first of all, with as many people as possible, and indeed we have a representative, from Parentkind, who will form part of our stakeholder group, and who we will want to, obviously take on board many of the issues that she raised during her presentation. We will also have representatives from the Children's Commissioner and from the Children's Law Centre. Obviously the Education Authority will be part of that as well. But one of the big issues for us is that we need to get into discussions with the boards of governors and with school principals, because they're very much a part of this. Now, I didn't get, and I may have missed this bit, but I didn't get anything from Jane's presentation as to whether or not she had surveyed any of the actual school principals or the boards of governors. But I think that is one of the areas that we will want to focus on to get their views on not only the current position, but on what we could do going forward to actually help parents and ensure that they can actually afford the uniforms, and that they are practical, and that they are of high quality, and that they are sustainable into the future. So our review is going to take up to 18 months to complete. Our indicative timescale is a pre-consultation with key stakeholders starting from December 2021, and we're just in the process of trying to get the first meeting set up with the key stakeholders over the coming weeks. We need to develop costed options for an incoming minister in May 2022. Now, those options will cover free school meals eligibility criteria as well as uniform grant eligibility criteria. At the moment, the same criteria applies to both free school meals and uniform grants. And we are very conscious, and someone mentioned it earlier, very conscious about the working poor, those who are just above the threshold for free school meals that are not entitled to free school meals and therefore are not entitled to uniform grants. And that is one of the issues we will be looking at as we take the review forward. So we'll develop costed options for an incoming minister in May 2022, and we intend to have public consultation by October 2022. If we have an agreed way forward by January 2023, then the implementation we would hope would be from the following start of the academic year from September 2023. Now clearly the uniform grants from next September, then the eligibility criteria is unlikely to be changed at that point. But I do think we need to look at interim measures and agree some interim measures subject to funding availability to see if there is anything we can do about the current rate of uniform grant or increasing the current rate of uniform grant. But that will clearly be very dependent on whether there is any funding or what the budget situation is like for next year. So that is where we are at this stage, and we're very happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Margaret Rose, and I appreciate your briefing today. As always, I find that you are genuinely engaged in an issue. With that acknowledgement, bear that in mind when I ask my questions, because I do think there are some serious questions to ask, and that's no reflection of your current commitment to address the task that you have recently been given. And look, in all of these issues, we have to acknowledge that the absence of an executive and assembly for 3 years has done nothing to advance some of these key issues that officials are trying to work on, to be fair to you. However, that said, the significance of school uniform costs are such that school uniform costs can dictate the school a child can attend. It can affect self-esteem, educational opportunity, and mean quite a lot to the financial safety of families. So it's an extremely important issue. The Children's Commissioner raised alarms as long ago as 2017, and in terms of the equality of opportunity of a child relating to school uniform costs, in her research found that there could be 25% premiums on grammar school uniforms, 51% premiums on grammar school PE costs. That's in addition to the average cost that you've referred to today as being concerning and sobering. So there are real serious issues here in relation to school uniform costs. The DE guidance to schools on uniform policy suggests that schools should ensure their uniform policy is fair and reasonable in practical and financial terms, and a court found that all interested parties should be consulted about uniform policy. In your assessment, are school uniform policies fair and reasonable in practical and financial terms as it stands?
Well, I think I would say that it probably varies across schools. I mean, there are some schools that are very good at consulting with parents, are very aware of the cost implications of their uniform grants, of the uniforms. In terms of whether it's fair and reasonable, I mean, until we do the research, until we go through the review, it is really difficult to say at this point. I couldn't say hand on heart, yes, every school policy is fair and reasonable, but it is something that we need to be looking at as we go forward. And how can we actually monitor the fairness or reasonableness or the cost of the uniforms, and that is something that we want to consider as part of the review.
Okay, is it fair or reasonable that a family should incur £1,000 per year costs for school uniform?
Sorry, can I just clarify that, Chair?
Yeah.
Those costs that we're starting was the return to school costs, and the biggest part of that was school uniform. So the actual cost for school uniform in primary was 126, and in post-primary 181, which is actually lower than the costs found by Parentkind and PEG, but it was the overall return and the pressure on families in every August.
Okay, and I mean,
apologies for that.
I apologize.
you know that look. Do you know what we can get into the variance on this, but I think multiple studies now and our own experiences suggest that at least at post primary it can be £200 to £300 at least for a child in a post primary setting. If you're in a family with 2 or 3 children in that context, then £1,000 per year is not far off what some families might be incurring, and that has to be a concern. So is the non-statutory guidance working?
Well, it was following the Children's Commissioner review in 2017 that we decided to reissue the guidance in 2018 to try to remind all schools, to keep the costs at a reasonable and fair level. Obviously, then, when the pandemic then struck in 2020, it became even more apparent that this divide between those who could afford issues and those who can't afford things then became more and more apparent. And that was when then the decision was taken, well, we need to seriously look at the free school meals and the uniform grant eligibility criteria, and at least then try to look at the costs as a contribution to the uniform grants, bearing in mind the different levels of uniform, bearing in mind the different costs of uniforms across the different sectors at this point. So, while I can't say that every school uniform policy is fair and reasonable, all I can say is really that we are taking steps now to try and address some of the concerns within those school uniform policies. We absolutely need to engage with the boards of governors and the school principals on this.
Okay, but you're not considering statutory guidance, which is a concern of mine. This Department of Education. Yeah.
Sorry, yes, that will be one of the areas within the terms of reference that we will be looking at. We will be considering whether legislation is the most appropriate.
Okay, well that might be new information. That might be encouraging because, and I'll come to that very quickly. But my concern is that this Department of Education guides and suggests on quite a lot of key issues. I could list a few, and it's increasingly concerning how much suggestion and guiding that it does on issues that need real action. So the Committee for Education wrote to the Education Minister in July 2021 further to research we commissioned from the Assembly Research and Information Services, and we on school uniform policy, and we provided the department with that research. And the key issues that we raised were to seek the department's perspective on cost and gender issues that were raised by the research, and to ask the department to consider uniform guidance on a statutory footing, and also to suggest that the department consider the introduction of price capping for school uniforms. The response that we received stated that there are no, on the 27th of July, said there are no plans at present to introduce legislation in relation to school uniform in Northern Ireland. However, the department is undertaking a review of free school meals and uniform grant eligibility criteria, and legislation will be considered in this context. So it also says at present we actively encourage school to keep costs low as far as possible, and support local uniform exchange programs. The department encourages schools to be aware of gender issues and ensure that their school uniform policy is fair and reasonable, and that they have regard to their duties under relevant quality information. Okay, so you can confirm that as part of this review, statutory guidance will be considered
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. And that a cap on school uniform costs will be considered?
Well, like I said in the English guidance, when the English legislation was first produced in June, when the actual act was issued, I mean the
29th of April.
The intention, I think, at that stage was to consider a cap on school uniform grants. But when the actual act, was published, and then the follow-up guidance was published in November, there is no cap as such. There is just still the statutory guidance this time, but it's still guidance that says that schools should keep should think about the total cost of school uniforms, and they should keep the use of branded items to a minimum, and all of those issues that I went through before. So they have not actually gone as far as to place a cap on the uniforms, and I mean it's not something that we're ruling out. I think it's all up for discussion as part of this review, and I'd be really interested to hear from others then just how a cap would actually work, in that regard.
Okay. But the items that you do refer to are now on a statutory footing in that jurisdiction? Yeah. Yes, yeah. Okay. Last couple of questions. Why will this review take so long?
First of all, it's the options for the criteria, for the eligibility criteria. I mean, there are a number of options there that we need to cost. And that we need to bring forward to, it'll be a new minister, because we don't have the capacity to have that options paper developed and ready for, ministerial consideration by March, which is likely to when, that's likely the date, or the latest date that we could get, the current minister to be able to approve or sign off on any consultation document, because we will be into an election period then, which is why we...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's just why then, we've been realistic about this. There is an awful lot of work involved in developing the options and in costing up each of those options. And that's why we've given until May.
Final question from me is, why is our grant so much less than in other jurisdictions? So our post-primary maximum grant is £78. In Scotland, I understand it's £150.
Yeah, that's right. Jill, maybe you can talk about how the grant rate was set.
Well, I think the fact that the grant rate has not increased since 2011 has increased that gap, and that was all due to budgetary pressures from 2010 budget onwards. So that is where we would have to possibly play catch up. And we weren't always doing comparisons with the other jurisdictions. So, the spend has been pretty consistent since 2010-11.
So our school uniform grant hasn't increased in any shape or form, not even inflation, in 10 years?
That's correct.
It did go up ever so slightly.
In 2010 it went up, it had... from the rate of 2009, it had gone up in 2010, but that was a particularly tough budget, and it has remained so ever since.
I think, in conclusion, I think it goes without saying that this is a matter of great urgency, and if the length of that review can be expedited in any way, I would encourage that. Thanks so much for your answers to my questions. Allow me to bring other members in. Pat Sheehan, MLA, Deputy Chair.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Margaret Rose and Jill, for your presentation. It's disappointing, first of all, to hear how long the review is going to take. Can you just update us where exactly the review is currently?
Oh, surely, yes. Well, first of all, we wrote to key stakeholders just about 3 weeks ago, and then that was really the start of the review. We have now got the list of stakeholders who want to be part of a key stakeholder group, and my intention is that we will meet with them before Christmas for the initial meeting, and that we can agree the terms of reference for that group, and that they can start work then on providing some research and evidence to ourselves. The intention then is within the department that we get start developing the cost options paper, and I need to share that options paper then with the group. Probably more than once, that we will, that's why we need the time up until March, April, to actually engage with the key stakeholder group, and also then engage with boards of governors, engage with school principals, and most importantly then engage with children and young people throughout that. And that is the timeline we have at the moment, and I need to be realistic, and there's no point in saying that we can do something by March, when I know that we are not going to be able to do it by March. I understand the disappointment that it is going to take a year and a half to get to the point when we can have a consultation completed and new guidance, whether that's statutory or otherwise. But I think there is the fact that we are considering something as an interim measure then for August of next year. I think recognises the length of time the review is going to take. But at this point in time, the next step is a meeting with the key stakeholders over the coming next couple of weeks.
Okay. I want to pick up on a point that the chair was making around guidance, and as he said, there's guidance issued to schools around various issues. In fact, I asked the Minister a question in the chamber the other day about schools using admissions criteria that actually contradicted the guidance that came from the department. Now, so it's clear schools do ignore guidance, certainly in some areas. Is it the case that some schools are ignoring the guidance in regarding school uniforms?
I couldn't say if they are actually ignoring it, and I think that is probably something that we want to see. How can we, if this becomes statutory guidance, how can we monitor the guidance? Can we work with our ETI, Education and Training Inspectorate? Can it be part of some of the inspections? I think those are all issues that we want to think about as part of the review. But I couldn't say at this stage that schools are ignoring the.
Okay, well let's not use the term ignore. Let's use the terms that you used. I think it was fair and reasonable. Are those the terms? Do you believe that all schools are being fair and reasonable when it comes to the issue of uniform costs?
Well, I think that the majority of schools are trying to work with or to keep the costs. I actually don't know. I don't have that information, so I couldn't say for sure that every school is acting in a fair and reasonable way in terms of uniforms. And until we have those discussions with boards of governors and with principals, I think I really wouldn't want to say yes or no to that question. We simply don't have that information. Have you any information, Jill?
We don't gather that information, but we will be putting questions into an omnibus survey, which is planned for February, but whether we'll have those results by the time we conclude the review, we would be asking things like, do you consult with parents? Do you consult with children?
And I think we can gauge from what Jane had said earlier about the parents' concerns around the lack of consultation that schools have had with them in developing their uniform policies. So I think there are issues certainly for us to address there.
Yeah, well, when you take account of the evidence we've heard this morning, not just from the previous witness, but also from yourselves, about the eye-watering cost of school uniforms and the premiums that are applied, not just on school uniforms, but particularly around branded PE gear. I mean, it seems fairly obvious that there are some schools who aren't operating a fair and reasonable policy when it comes to school uniforms. Would you not agree with that? I mean, I don't think it's a difficult or a controversial question I'm asking you.
I mean, no, I think it's a fair point. It would appear that, with the costs as high as that, it would appear that there are some schools, that are developing uniform policies that could be considered, unfair or unreasonable. And I suppose a lot of it will depend on, what the parents think of that in those particular schools. And until we can gauge the parents' views of those particular schools, then that's why I wouldn't want to be saying that school is being unfair or unreasonable. It's just that we simply don't gather the information. We don't have the information, but a lot will be about, well, how do the parents whose children go to those particular schools feel about the cost of those uniforms? And it's right down to that local level. Some of the parents may find it reasonable. Others.
Okay, fair enough. And just finally, I mean, it's disappointing that the department doesn't have that evidence, doesn't have that information about school uniform costs in individual schools. But given the apparent difficulties that exist, and as I say, the eye-watering costs that are a burden on families, particularly at this time, as Nicola Brogan pointed out earlier, in a cost of living crisis, prices of food, fuel, heating, and so on, gone up through the roof. Is it not the case? Would you not agree with this that we need to have all schools adhering to the guidance, and the best way to do that is to put the guidance on a statutory footing? Thanks.
Thanks, Pat.
Sorry, of course, if it's on a statutory footing, yes. But I think there's something before that, in that we need to work with the boards of governors and the principals. We need to talk to both of those and ensure that the parents are involved in the uniform policy making in the first instance. And so I think that's step first, and then certainly, the statutory element of all of this will be taken forward as part of the review. There will be discussions on that, and we will see where we can get to with that.
Okay.
But if we will still have to monitor it in some way, then, if it's whether it's on a statutory basis or on a non-statutory basis.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Pat. I don't want to seem excessively harsh in line of questioning here. However, why does the Department of Education not know whether schools are using fair and reasonable school uniform policies whenever it has guidance on them to do that?
The guidance isn't actually monitored because of its advisory status, so schools aren't tested on it. There has been, as I said, omnibus surveys done in the past, but we haven't done any in the recent past, and it's asking schools about how they do their uniform, how often they change it and how much the costs are, and that type of thing. But we really need up-to-date information on that, and we're hoping the next survey in February will give us a flavour. But it'll only be a sample of schools. It's not all schools take part in the survey.
I mean, what is the purpose of guidance if you don't monitor it in some shape or form?
Well, it is guidance. It's there. It's to help schools formulate their policies in the first instance. I certainly would hope that all schools will consider the guidance in establishing their uniform policies. Now, some more than others probably, but I think it's there for the purpose. It's for the guidance.
Okay. I mean, we heard in the Assembly Chamber this week of parents having to take court action for schools to follow departmental guidance on post-primary transfer or post-primary admissions. I mean, is there a concerning picture developing here of Children's Commissioner, parents, courts having to act in order for de-issued guidance to actually have effect?
Well, I hope that as part of the review, this will raise and certainly highlight all of the issues that the parents have, that's including the costs. And I think that in itself, will raise the awareness among the boards of governors, the school principals, and it can start that discussion and that debate, so that we won't ever get to the point where we have to go to court, or that someone has to go to court because of the guidance not being adhered to. But I think that's all part of that conversation that we want to have.
Okay, thanks. Can I bring in Diane Dodds, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thank you, folks, for the really interesting presentation. Look, I think that this is a massive subject, affects every family in Northern Ireland. I suppose really what I want to get to is that whether we have statutory rules or guidance around this, that school uniform policy does not mean that some young people are put off or excluded from educational opportunity or going to the school that they want to go to because of circumstances that are really outside of their control. So I would like to be reassured at the start of this whole process, and you're very much in the beginnings, that the outcome is to seek a fair and equitable way forward for all of our community here in Northern Ireland. And that we will try to apply some general principles around this that allow that to happen. And I'd like to know how you're going to approach that, first of all. And I suppose the second part of my question is, when I look around local schools here in Banbridge, Lurgan, Portadown, school uniform hasn't changed. The actual, the Banbridge Academy Green was the same as in the dark ages when I was going to Banbridge Academy Green. It's just, it has not changed. Now, there are elements of the school uniform, thankfully, that has changed, but it hasn't changed. Is this a sin of omission rather than a deliberate act? Do some schools simply not understand the impact of really expensive school uniform for families?
I mean, that is possible, and I think that is what part of this review will be actually to highlight the very real concerns that there are out there among families. And I think, Jane's information, particularly around the impact these costs have on the mental health of parents, I think that is really, that was really stark for me and stood out for me. And I think those are issues that we want to highlight among the boards of governors. And for them to be absolutely aware of the impact that their policies can have on these parents. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the first part of the question, Jill. Did you point out?
Sorry, the first part is simply to say, that at the end of the day, we're looking for ways of making sure that entry into school is not barred because of price of uniform. Absolutely. And that what we will have is a fair and equitable way forward for all young people. I am a supporter of school uniform. I do think in general it's a good thing. But I'm not really a supporter of something that differentiates between children in a school. I have a wool blazer, you have a blazer that may not. I have a badge that's sewn on, you have a badge that's, embroidered in your. I want a fair and equitable way forward, and I want to know that is the line and the methods that you're going to pursue it. And I suspect that many schools haven't given over much thought at times to the impact of uniform on parents and children.
I'm sorry, one of the first things that the review has got to be clear on is that why we are doing this is we want to ensure that there are no barriers to children.
Yes.
Having the opportunity to go to whatever school it is that they have preference for. So the no barriers is absolutely vital in all of this. Jill, do you want to say anything about the aims of the review?
Yeah, well, I think, it's very important that along with the no barriers, we look at the whole value for money and consumer choice and off the peg, and all the things that we have rehearsed along the way. And it was quite obvious that there's a great role for the PTA and the voluntary community sectors. And that's when we're looking at the sustainability and the whole pre-loved recycling issues, which are really raising now in comparison to a few years ago. So that will also be one of the key parts of it. But we're also, I suppose, another thing that has raised it up a bit is the whole impact of COVID, and the whole poverty and the gap widening in the poverty. But it's also then raised the whole unused uniforms when schools were closed, and you have brand new uniforms that children have grown out of, and they can be reused for the pre-loved and the sustainability issue. But also a lot of schools are a lot more flexible now about their school uniform policies and about wearing PE gear in to school on PE days, and the whole washing, the whole issue of the more frequent washing possibly due to COVID, and I think they're probably more in tune, and now is a very opportune time to be raising all these issues around seasonality and the stress on families every August, July and August come forward. So all those issues will, I think they're all coming together just at the right time of the review. And of course the reviews are broader than just the school uniform. It's the whole free school meals part of it as well, which is really why the amount of time is necessary.
Final question, Diane. Thanks.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much. Can I bring in Daniel McCrossan, MLA, please? Is Daniel there? Maybe some connectivity issues. I'll come back to Daniel then. If I could bring in Nicola Brogan, MLA, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Margaret Rose and Joe. Great to hear from you this morning as well. This afternoon now it is. Listen, I'll not rehash all this, what we've went over this morning already. We know how important it is that this that school uniform policy is reviewed, and it is quite disappointing that the review is going to take so long, but I understand that there are procedures to follow. But it, as Pat's mentioned, I mentioned earlier, it's hitting families really hard at this very moment. So the cost of living is hitting household budgets, is making it really difficult for them, and then just this added pressure of uniforms, that added pressure on families is just really, really tough on families. So it is disappointing that the review is going to take so long, but I'm glad that the review is taking place. I suppose I want to talk about, you just mentioned there when you were speaking to Diane about the barriers to education, and that's something I put to Jane as well, about the cost of expensive uniforms to some schools, and that is a barrier to education, and it's removing parental choice for many parents. Just what are your views on that there? What kind of solutions can you bring to the floor to remove that kind of barrier to education in that regards, please?
Well, I'm hoping that the stakeholder group will be able to come up with some options for me within that. But I mean, I think there are other options around some of, particularly the very expensive PE kit. We've been thinking about things like, sponsorship. For example, many of the schools, many of the children at the schools who are playing football or Gaelic or hurling or hockey, they also belong to local clubs, and clearly there is a correlation between the local club and the school. So are there ways there where that schools can actually can seek sponsorship from either local clubs or local even local businesses to help sponsor some, possibly not all, but maybe even some year groups for particularly teams that are going out to play competitively against other schools. So there's those type of things that we're looking at. Are there other ways, instead of schools having to have expensive branded PE kits, that they can actually get sponsorship from other organisations? particularly those organisations that benefit from the PE and the sport that goes on in some schools. That's one option.
Yeah, I think that's an important one, Margaret Rose. But I suppose the other point is just about the main school uniforms. Well, obviously the PE kits and that additional cost for PE kits is an additional strain, but it's also finding solutions for the main school uniform as well. And like it's been discussed at length already this morning about the logos on blazers, whether they're like stick-on ones or sewn-on ones, whatever. So all issues that need to have a sharp focus on. The other issue that I raised with Jane from Parentkind this morning was about kind of gender neutrality when it comes to school uniforms. And I know it's been in the media recently, and it's been in the chamber as well about girls wanting to wear trousers to school instead of being forced to wear skirts, whether because of the weather and being colder in the winter months, or because of being on the period, not feeling comfortable in a skirt and preferring to wear trousers. So is that something that the review would consider taking into account as well?
I absolutely think that, but I think that's all part of the conversations that the Board of Governors, we have with half of the Board of Governors, and the Board of Governors will have with the parents then, and indeed with the children and young people. Their views, the children and young people's views in particular, I think are going to be really crucial in this. We already have a campaign called Trousers for All, where we have had a number of young people writing to us. Trousers are very much now an acceptable part of the workplace, and indeed, many workplaces, will have women particularly wearing trousers. So, it's something I think that possibly schools haven't thought about in the past. I don't know, but I think it's something that we will raise awareness of all of that as we go through the review.
Listen, I think it's something that definitely needs to be taken account of, and I'm glad to hear that you are going to be listening to children and young people and have their voices heard in this consultation. But also, as we've heard this morning, really vital that we hear from parents as well, because their voice is obviously just as important as children and young people in this instance and throughout the education system. So listen, I appreciate that. Thank you to the both of you, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Nicola. Can I bring in Justin McNulty, MLA, please?
Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Margaret Rose, and thank you, Jill. My great-great-grandmother was called Margaret Rose. I love the name, so compliments on the name, Margaret Rose. The gap year on year between EA uniform grants and the real cost is widening. Does the department have any detail on that above what we've seen today from Parentkind?
So the gap in the rate of uniform grants, is that what you said?
The gap in the grants and the gap in the actual cost of uniforms.
Oh yes.
And I think we absolutely realise that the cost of the uniform and the contribution for the uniform grant is, very, very small in terms of what the actual cost of the uniform is, and that is why we need to address the difference there. We look across what England, Scotland, and Wales are providing, and England, Scotland £120 for primary school, £150 for secondary school age, Wales £125 and £200 for those entering year 7. So there's a real discrepancy in our costs, and that is something that we are mindful of, and that is very much part of the review that we will be looking to any funding streams that become available to try and increase the cost initially, and then with the review of the eligibility to try and bring more people into the system.
Margaret, would you not agree that's a really bad indictment on the department in terms of what's provided elsewhere and what's provided here? And it's a really bad indictment on the minister and on former ministers. That's shocking.
Well, I think it is. It's also the fact that the budgets have been so particularly tight over the last number of years. There is at the minute there has been a set budget really, across the Education Authority for uniform grants, and they have used that, and they've tried to use that in the most and then the best way that they can and accommodate or provide a grant to the vast majority of well, certainly all of those in receipt of free school meals. But yeah, we know that there is a huge discrepancy there, and that is what we're hoping to address as part of this review. It all comes down, in terms of the amount of the grant, it all comes down to the amount of money available.
Okay, well, budgets have been tight elsewhere. It just seems to be more of a priority elsewhere, it appears to me, Margaret Rose. So whilst I accept your argument, I don't really accept them. So why is it taking 18 months for the department to review uniform policy when there is a review of the entire education system taking place over the same time span? Discrepancy. I just don't feel it's 18 months is a reasonable time span for a uniform policy review.
Well, I guess, what we do within the entire directorate, we don't have the capacity to do it within the same time frame. We don't have. I have probably one dedicated person who will be working on this over the course of the next 6 months. Once we get the options paper developed and agreed with a new minister in May, the time frame can be changed after that. It would depend on the length of time for consultation. But the one thing I have to say is that because this is free school meals is included within this grant or within this review, we have to be mindful that if there is any increase in the numbers of children receiving free school meals, that the Education Authority are going to need a reasonable lead-in time to ensure that they have the kitchens and the staff available for any increase that there is likely to be in the number of children taking free school meals. Now, we're mindful of that, which is why we said, well, we need to do something about uniform grants in the interim, and the contribution that we make to uniform grants in the interim, which is why we will be seeking every opportunity to look at any of the budgets or the funding streams that become available. But the EA will require, a number of weeks, potentially a number of months, to actually make sure that they have, the right capacity within kitchens and the capacity within the workforce for the free school meals increase, or any free school meals increase.
Okay. In terms of robustness and COVID, and this is something probably hasn't been really considered, parents are washing school uniforms more often than during normal times. How has that affected the longevity of school uniforms? Or do you have any information on that, Margaret Rose?
Well, I guess, clearly it depends on the quality of the uniform grant or the uniform that was purchased in the first instance. The more you wash things, depending again on the quality, the more likely they are going to wear out much sooner. The only thing I would say is that, for some parents, and this is anecdotal information I have, the unfortunate thing was they bought a brand new uniform in September 2019, but because schools were closed from March 2020, they didn't get the full year's wear out of it. So they had that cost then, and they had to buy a new uniform then when the schools were returning in 2020. So, the pandemic has really had a really negative, a much more negative impact on families from lower incomes than the vast majority of other families, simply because of all of those costs, and then having to buy new again buy new uniforms again in September, because either they are worn out or because indeed they will wear out throughout the course of the year because of the additional washing. I think we recognise the cost of that, yeah.
Okay. Climate change, back to a point Nicola made earlier on recycling and the policy of the department on that and provision, and how that would be explored and interrogated and fully embraced. Is that foremost in your thinking?
Absolutely. I think that, and I think it will be one of the issues that are foremost in the thinking of children and young people, because I think they're very mindful of climate change, and I think that's why we need to be careful about the language we use around second-hand or used. I think we need to start talking about pre-loved, about recyclable materials. I think some of the initiatives that some of the schools have been doing already with their pop-up
exchanges.
The what?
The exchange.
Pop-up exchange. I think all of those things need to be encouraged, and we will be hoping to encourage those as part of our final guidance, or whether that's statutory or not, but the final document that comes out as a result of the review. I think, that's not something that any of us can ignore.
Yeah, well, you can play a major part in that, Margaret Rose and Jill, in terms of new needs to be enough. School uniforms, new uniforms need to be enough. Recycled, upcycled, pre-loved need to be the
Yes.
the hip style. If you haven't got pre-worn, then you're enough. So
Yeah.
you can control
Yes, absolutely.
that thinking. Okay, so listen. I recognise that you both ladies care passionately about this, and so thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Harry Harvey, MLA. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Margaret and Jill, today. Good to see you. Well, suppose first of all, I do believe that school uniforms are still the best and only way to go. And everybody sort of went over the recycling is the thing that does need to be pushed in the review. And the principals do need to push that on towards the PTA. To go on to some, talking about branded items, keeping those to a minimum in the review. And as far as the emblems go, I think that all emblems should be probably sewed on, and then at least they can be made available by the school and probably a service provided by the school or a recommendation where that's done. I think that would be good in the review. And I think that gives people a wider choice of where and what to buy. Colours, there are slight variations in colours. Even things are washed lots of times. They change colours, so I think that would make that more acceptable. It's a long time away, but as everyone says, how many people are actually working on the review? Could you tell me that?
Well, at the moment, there's probably 1.5 people.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So that's difficult enough. And it's not just the review. Obviously, they're working on. There's lots of other things happening as well.
This is the same across all departments. It's not just this department that has an issue around resourcing. But I just need to be absolutely realistic and honest with people that it's no point in telling you that it'll be done earlier than it's likely to be.
So, and it's only started really at the minute. So, how would you rate progress at the minute? What's it, do you think?
We have literally started about 3 weeks ago. I'm waiting for 2 more of the main stakeholders to come back to me, with the nominees. And then, 13th or 20th, I want to have a meeting with the first meeting with the key stakeholders to get them doing a little bit of work for me, so that we can start then the options paper.
Okay. That's grand. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Harry. Thanks very much indeed for the update today. Obviously, an issue of real concern for the committee, and hopefully you can apply as much resource and prioritisation to the work as possible. I think there are key areas for work there in terms of statutory guidance, consideration of caps, and an urgent need to increase a grant that has stayed the same for over a decade. We wish you really well in that work, and commit ourselves to help in whatever way we can to ensure that the outcomes are achieved as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, can I ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove witnesses and add members back into the spotlight? Clark, if you want to summarise actions, I'm conscious that we need to move to the department's briefing on flexible school starting age as well. Thank you.
Yes, Chair, I think it's worth representing just some of those main points back to Margaret Rose in writing to help her with that review that she's just about to undertake. And I will look at the forward work plan and see if there's an opportunity where we might do a youth engagement that could feed into the process that the department is undertaking. There were some practical issues as well with costing that members raised that I think it would be good to follow up on, such as whether the uniform grant has got an impact on benefits. This idea that when you give a grant for something like this, there's just a shift in the retail commensurate with the amount of the grant, so that actually no one gets the benefit of the grant, and what you might do about that. And I think the committee again does seem to be wanting to move this, to a legislative footing in the absence of more alacrity from schools. So the department has got an exercise to do there in terms of engaging with boards of governors. So that's all I would have in terms of actions just now, Chair, but I'm happy to have you add to those.
Okay, members content to agree those actions? Agreed. I think this is a key issue that the Education Committee will obviously want to monitor. I am not sure 18 months is an acceptable period of time for outcomes on any of those issues, and I suspect you may see MLA action in the interim if urgent action is not taken on issues such as statutory guidance and increases to a grant that shockingly has not increased in over a decade. Okay, members, I'll move us to agenda item 9 then, which is our briefing from the Department of Education on flexible school starting age. Can I ask broadcasting to remove members and to add witnesses? Refer members to a briefing paper from the department on page 9 of tabled papers. DE Deferring School Starting Age Consultation Document at page 195, and a raised briefing paper on school starting age policy and practice in the UK at page 231. Can I welcome Suzanne Kingan, Director of Curriculum Qualification and Standards at the Department of Education, Adrian Murphy, Head of School Age Flexibility Team at the Department of Education, and Sam Dempster, Head of Curriculum Policy at the Department of Education. Apologies for the delay in joining you today. We'll give you up to 10 minutes to make opening comments, and then I'll facilitate as many questions as possible. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yes. That's some of the best audio the Department of Education's ever brought to the Education Committee. Good start.
Thank you for the opportunity to brief the committee today on the department's policy proposals and public consultation on deferral of school starting age. We have provided the committee with a written briefing paper setting out the background to our work and details of our engagement with stakeholders. I trust also that committee members will have had the opportunity to review the department's consultation document, which was published on the 9th of November. I will therefore keep my opening remarks brief and use them as an opportunity to set out for the committee key aspects of the department's proposals. As committee members will be aware, most children in Northern Ireland currently attend preschool for 1 year before starting primary school. Government funds a preschool place for every child whose family want it, but it is not compulsory for children to attend preschool. Children then start primary school aged 4 or 5. Our children born in April, May and June are the youngest in the school class, starting school shortly after their 4th birthday. These children are sometimes referred to as young for year children. In its current consultation, the department is proposing greater flexibility will be available for these young for year children. Most will continue to start preschool in September following their 3rd birthday and year 1 of primary school in September following their 4th birthday. However, should they wish to do so, parents will be able to defer their young for year child's entry to preschool and in turn primary school by 12 months. So this effectively means they will start preschool in September following their 4th birthday and primary school in September following their 5th birthday. As you're all aware, preschool is a very important stage of early education, with many benefits to long-term educational outcomes. Preschool education provides a rich variety of challenging play-based learning activities and helps prepare children for primary school. The department's proposals, where both preschool and primary school are deferred by 1 year, means that children who defer will continue to receive 1 year of preschool immediately before starting primary school. This importantly ensures continuity of early years education. It is also an equitable approach, as it means all children continue to receive 1 year of government-funded preschool. Should the department's proposals be implemented, parents who wish their child to defer would normally do so instead of applying to preschool at the usual time. Deferred children will then be treated as normal members of the younger school year group, applying for preschool and year 1 through the normal admissions process. Again, this approach is designed to ensure equity for all children. No child is unduly advantaged or disadvantaged through the decision to defer starting school. A final issue I wish to bring the committee's attention to is that all children in Northern Ireland currently receive 12 years of compulsory education, being permitted to leave school on the 30th of June following their 16th birthday. A key concern for parents is that if a child defers entry to year 1, they could currently leave school at the end of year 11 without completing their GCSE qualifications. We are therefore proposing also to amend the law to ensure that our deferred children continue to receive 12 years of compulsory education, and they will remain of compulsory school age until the end of the academic year when they turn 17. Again, committee will note that equity is a key element of our proposals, ensuring equitable and comparable provision for all children. The department's proposals are currently open for public consultation, which will run until the 4th of January. We are reviewing and considering responses as they come in, and I am delighted to advise the committee we have received over 400 responses to date. The public reaction to the department's proposals has been extremely positive. Almost 88% of respondents strongly agreeing or agreeing with the department's proposals. Officials are working closely with the Office of Legislative Counsel to develop relevant legislation, and we plan, subject to executive agreement, to bring forward legislation early in the new year. The Minister intends to request accelerated passage to enable this extremely important change to become law during the current mandate. In conclusion, the Department has worked in conjunction with stakeholders to bring forward practical, workable proposals which we believe can bring real benefits for children and their families. Our proposals reflect significant engagement with stakeholders and a thorough review of academic literature. This matter is the highest priority for the Education Minister, and we will continue to work at pace to bring forward legislation. I thank members for the opportunity to provide this briefing, and we are of course happy to take members' questions. Thank you.
Thank you. That's as close to an I's dotted and T's crossed briefing we've received in some time, I would say. That's some really good news there. I suppose it's just tinged with a sadness that it wasn't possible for next year's application cohort. That will be just missed by that legislation. That's a genuine question? The applications are obviously January, aren't they? Yeah.
So the application process, obviously for preschool and primary school, would be underway by the time these proposals could potentially become law. In effect, if these proposals became law, compulsory school starting age would be altered, and children born in April, May and June wouldn't reach compulsory school age until they became 5, so they wouldn't reach it at the point of being 4. So deferral would be an option for those children if this became law, despite the admissions process opening this year, and I hope that makes sense.
Okay, so children who were born late in the school year last year, though, and who are applying, so that the application for them is already passed. Does that not apply for this year then? No.
Well, I'm not quite sure what you're making
Okay.
there, Chair.
Okay, so if applicants are applying this January and the law is passed on the timescale that you say, they could still defer. They still may have the option to defer.
They could defer year one and reapply next year through the admissions process.
Okay, and would that mean? Okay, that'll apply just to preschool at this stage, though. Yeah.
No, because if the law's changed, a child born in April, May and June who are applying to school will no longer be compulsory school age, so they could defer primary school entry. We'd obviously have to look closely at transitional arrangements for those children, and we will do that at pace. But if the law has changed, the law has changed.
Okay. Okay, that's it. I must admit, I did not realise that the timescale was going to be achievable before the end of the mandate. Have you expedited matters along the way here, or have we got to this point?
In what sense, Chair? In terms of the bill, or in terms of the?
I sat in rooms where I was advised it would be extremely difficult to achieve the legislation before the end of the mandate, but that is happening.
Extremely difficult. It remains extremely difficult and challenging. But
okay.
If accelerated passage is granted, we've been working to develop a timetable in terms of bringing forward the bill. A lot obviously depends on executive agreement, on agreement of accelerated passage, and on the bill getting through the relevant stages of the Assembly in a timely fashion. But it is our aim to do that.
Brilliant. Good news. Okay, I'll bring other members in at that stage. Can I bring in Pat Sheehan, MLA, Deputy Chairperson?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation. First of all, I welcome this news and the fact that it's proposed to get this legislation through before the end of the mandate. I know it's an issue that I've been lobbied on for quite a number of years now. I don't want to be churlish, but there are a couple of points I want to raise. First of all, if a parent puts their child in the preschool, a child who's young for their year, and it's only during the course of that preschool year that they realise that the child hasn't reached a developmental stage that would suggest the child is ready for P1. Is there any way that child can be held back?
So I think we need to separate the issue of a second year of preschool and starting school. So if the department's proposals are implemented, that child will obviously have the opportunity then to defer school entry. They would not be entitled to a funded second year of preschool, and there's several reasons for that. If we were to offer second year funded preschool for children who defer, those children would then be the oldest in the school year and have had 2 years of preschool, whereas other younger children who don't defer would only be eligible for 1 year of preschool. And we think that has the potential to incentivise deferral and also to introduce greater inequity. So the child would have the opportunity to defer year one, and they wouldn't have to start year one in the September, but they wouldn't have the opportunity for a second year of funded preschool under our proposals. We're maintaining the offer for 1 year of funded preschool for all children.
Yeah, no, and I understand that. I suppose what I'm asking you is if there is any flexibility in the system, so that, I mean, it's not going to be the case that every child or the parent of every child who is young for the year is going to ask for a deferral. No. You know, and many kids who are young for their year progress normally through their school career without any difficulties. But we do know from the research evidence that some do fall behind, and these are the ones who developmentally aren't ready for formal education in P1. So let's say, for example, a parent thought their child was ready for preschool and would be ready to go into P1. but then receives a clinical assessment, for example, and I'm just throwing out examples here, that the child wasn't ready in a developmental sense for P1. Is there any flexibility in the system?
So they would be able to still defer year one. If a child is statemented with special educational needs, if there was an assessment and they were statemented, they are able to be retained in preschool currently under the current law. There is already the flexibility to do that. Obviously, you're talking maybe about a scenario where a child's not statemented and whether they could have a second year preschool. And I think it is important to emphasise that there's very strong educational evidence that repeating a year and doing a second year, both at preschool and right the way through a child's educational career, is actually a very poor educational intervention. The Education Endowment Foundation and others have identified it as a negative educational intervention. It actually produces worse outcomes for children repeating a year. So we don't think that money spent and investment spent on a second year of preschool for children who defer is a good investment. We would rather give parents the opportunity to defer the preschool year, then have, bring preschool 1 year later, P1 1 year later. They've got that continuity of 1 year of preschool and then P1. If a parent has put them into preschool at the normal time and then decides they're not ready for P1, they still, under the proposals, don't have to start P1. They still have the flexibility to defer the child and make other arrangements for them that year, and they don't have to provide them with full-time education during that year under the department's proposals.
Okay, thanks for that. And just to move on to a slightly different issue, we're proposing legislation here. The minister's proposing legislation to resolve an issue around kids who haven't reached a developmental stage that would be expected when they're getting into the P1. Now, we have among the youngest starting age in Europe, but there's no educational rationale as to why children should be starting school at 4. Would it not be better to extend the school starting age to 6 or 7? And I'm talking about formal education. Kids would still go to school and learn through play and so on, as happens in places, like Scandinavia. I mean, Finland is held up as one of the top education systems in the world. And the children there don't start formal education until they're 7. So are we not an outlier in this? Given the fact that all the research shows that there's no educational rationale for children starting formal education at 4, and if we did that, the problems that arise now because of children who are young for their year, not having reached a sufficient developmental stage, would all those problems not be resolved by extending the school starting age? Thanks.
Well, I think we have to distinguish a couple of things. When we're talking about school starting age, the most important thing is the type of education that a child receives at the ages of 4, 5 and 6, not necessarily the institution that they receive it in. So we have a play-based curriculum in the foundation stage. Children learn through play. It is not the curriculum that you or I would have had when we went to school, the formal, it is a play-based learning experience, and that is so important. And I think it's very important that we emphasise that to parents who have concerns, that throughout the foundation stage, children will learn through challenging, well-planned and creative play, both indoors and outdoors. So we're not putting children into a very formal learning environment in the way that perhaps we were 30 years ago. We also need to emphasise that PISA outcomes across 74 different countries, they show absolutely no correlation between school starting age and attainment. Countries with low school starting age perform strongly. Some countries with a higher school starting age perform strongly. And it is not A later school starting age is in no way associated with better outcomes for children and young people. It's just not the case. It is an absolutely mixed story. Some countries with a later school starting age perform quite poorly in PISA, others perform well, and it's much, much more to do with the quality of provision and the nature of provision than school starting age. It is a mixed bag internationally, and there isn't really international agreement. What there is agreement on is that it's much, much more important that children receive high quality play-based learning experiences right throughout their early years, and including the ages of 4, 5 and 6, which our children do. I think it's also important that we would say as a department, we do challenge the notion of children being school ready. It's not a matter of a child being ready for school. All of our schools should be ready to receive all children and provide developmentally appropriate provision for them. It's not, children don't have to reach a certain standard to start school, and our provision and our proposals are around some very young children whose parents have particular anxieties around starting school. It is not the message that a child needs to meet certain developmental milestones in order to be ready for school. Our schools are there to meet the needs of all of our children across a huge range of developmental and ability needs.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I don't disagree with what you're saying. I suppose I'm simply making the point that we need to look beyond our own borders here, that we need to look at international best practice, what's happening elsewhere in the world, and what we can take from systems, that education systems that are performing well at the very top level. So thanks for that, anyway. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Can I bring in Diane Dodds, MLA, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for what will be very good news for parents today who have children who need to defer entering formal education. I wouldn't disagree that we do, with others in the committee who say that we do start children at school into formal education quite early in Northern Ireland. And that in other countries like Germany, it is a much later start for children. But then those children also have access to a very full preschool education programme in all of those countries as well. So it's a matter for the review of education. But today will be good news for those parents and good news for children who need to start to defer entering into the formal education system, and will give them the breathing space that they need to be able to benefit most from formal education. So that is very, very good news. Just confirm for me that parents who have a child due to start school next September, but who may feel that their child is maybe born in June or maybe a little bit premature, and therefore therefore would benefit from another year out of the formal system, those children will benefit from this measure should the accelerated passage get a fair wind and go through the system.
Yeah, so our proposals would aim to change compulsory school age. So yes. Children at the minute who are born in April, May and June reach compulsory school age on the 1st of August after they turn 4. Once this bill would receive royal assent, children born in April, May and June would not be of compulsory school age until the 1st of August after they're 5. So if a parent didn't want them to start school, they wouldn't have to. Indeed, even under the current law, they don't actually have to start school. But under the current law, the parent would have to provide full-time home education, whereas under our proposals, they would not.
Yes. No, that's absolutely excellent news. And I look forward to a time when we can have even more flexibility and start young people midway through terms, etc. But anyway, thank you very much. It's very good news today.
Thanks, Diane. Can I bring in Nicola Brogan, MLA, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks everyone again for your presentation this afternoon. Again, like everyone else said, it's really welcome development, and myself and other members here of the committee have been lobbied heavily on it, so I'm pleased for those parents who have done it there, that there's been this movement on it, and hopefully we will see it by the end of this mandate. I just want to go back, Suzanne, to a point you made there with Pat when you were discussing about children with statements. Did you say that they already have the opportunity to have an additional year at school if they have a statement?
At nursery, yes, if the Education Authority deems it an appropriate placement, they can have a second preschool year at a nursery or nursery unit.
Okay, well, so what concerned me there whenever you said that was, we know that there's massive delays in assessments and diagnosis of a range of educational needs. So where does this legislation or this proposal then fall into place then with those delays and with children with the statements? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think we're very clear. These are not proposals around to deal with issues for children with special educational needs. The approach for children with special educational needs is early intervention and support, and I acknowledge the points you're making around that. This is a process about parents who have concerns about very young children starting school at the age of 4 years 2 months, 4 years 3 months, or 4 years 4 months. It is not about a process of deferring school entry for children with special educational needs, because the right approach for those children is early intervention and support within the education system. So I think we're quite clear on that these are proposals around young for year children, and they're not designed, deferral of starting school is not necessarily the right approach for a child with SEN, because preschool isn't compulsory. A parent does not have to send their child to preschool. So if you had a child, for example, who had SEN, the parent decided not to send them to preschool, they were an older child in the year, the parent also deferred entry to P1, they could be presenting at school at the age of 6 with no intervention and support provided until that point. So we're quite clear this is an option for children who are young for year, and it's not an intervention around SEN support.
Suzanne, thanks for that. Actually, I really appreciate that clarity, because I was getting myself a wee confused there, but what you said makes sense. I think it's good to have that kind of clarification for all parents. The other point I wanted to raise was about the Fair Start report. Indicated about the importance of early years education and preschool and that was going to be their kind of main focus beyond that there. So how do you think these proposals fit in with that there as well?
Well, I think they sit very well with it, because our proposals to also allow children to defer their preschool year mean that children will continue to benefit from a preschool year and then starting primary school in the next consecutive year. So it provides that continuity. It also means that young for year children, if their parents don't want them to start preschool, if they think, no, my child's not quite ready for that yet, they'll have the opportunity to delay the preschool as well, access the preschool at age 4, and hopefully have an excellent preschool experience before they start primary school.
Okay, thank you for that, Suzanne. My final point you've already talked about in your presentation now, but if maybe you just want to develop it further, was about the right of children to have access to 12 years of education. And you said you're going to amend the law to ensure that happens. So I'm not sure if you want to develop that any further, but I'm glad to hear that you've taken that on board.
Yeah, so currently the law's a little more complicated than this, but to summarise it, children basically can leave school the 30th of June following their 16th birthday. So obviously a child who was born in April, May and June, if they deferred the age 5, the 30th of June following their 16th birthday would be the end of year 11, not year 12. So what we want to do is we want to make an amendment to say those children won't reach the end of compulsory school age until the following academic year, when they reach the end of year 12. So those children will be turning 17 in that April, May and June. But we think that's really, really important, because we don't want any child to be leaving school at year 11 before they take formal qualifications. It's so important that they continue to get those 12 full years of compulsory education and then go on to FE or remain in school or any of the various pathways that are available. So we think that's really important change, and it will also hopefully allay parental concerns that if they deferred their child could leave school early at the far end. I hope that makes sense.
It does, Stan, and I absolutely agree with you there. I think that's a really important point to make, that we will have the full 12 years of education. So I appreciate you explaining that as well. But listen, thanks so much to the three of you, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Nicola. So it's not entirely comprehensive provision in terms of flexibility that some people have been campaigning for, but that is what it is. Can I ask, in terms of that deferred year, would there be any statutory provision in place for a child and a family that does defer that year?
So the plan would be, Chair, for most applicants for deferral to also defer preschool. So they wouldn't start preschool, so they will have the preschool year in the year that they would have started P1.
I think it's important, Chair, just to emphasise the engagement with the parents at an early stage. A lot of parents will already know, when their child is a year and a half, 2 years, that they're already young for year, born premature, etc. And they will have already made up their mind prior to preschool that their child is already young. There will be people who will choose at a later stage and identify that later, but the majority of parents that we've spoken to have already identified that at a very young age.
I've scudded the audio.
Sorry, Chair, you're breaking up for us a wee bit, sorry.
You broke up for us as well. Can you hear me?
Just about.
Okay, it might be on our end then. Sorry.
Well, that's better now.
Do you want to finish that point? Sorry.
Sorry, making the point that in our engagement with parents and with the various different lobby groups around this, it was very clear that the parents who are most interested in deferral have already made up their mind, or have already their intention and desire very clear at a very early age. So, we expect that there'll be a minimal number of people who are affected who would go to preschool and then be affected. And that's actually the position that operates in Scotland, where most people have already decided long before it gets to the formal primary school admissions process.
I think it is a balancing act for us, Chair. On balance, we don't believe the offer of a second year of preschool is investment well spent. We also don't think that it is equitable, because it means, for example, a child who was born in June, who started school at the normal time, they would start school then at 4 years, 2 months, having received 1 year of preschool, whereas a child who chooses to defer would start at the age of 5 years, 2 months, and possibly having had 2 years of preschool. As I say, most of the evidence says repetition of any school year, including preschool, is not a good intervention for a child. And even if you think of the cycle of a nursery year, where they're, being settled in, they're being welcomed to nursery, in the summer term they're learning about transition to primary, it's not particularly appropriate for a child to go through that twice.
Okay. Bring in Justin McNulty, MLA, and then Harry Harvey. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, folks. Interesting concept in the sporting realm. It's repetition. In education, it's not repetition. Just give me your views on that.
Yeah. Well, all of the international evidence would say that a child who repeats a year has, vis-a-vis a child of equal ability who continues, makes less progress than the child who continues with their peers. And there's quite a number of factors around that. One is obviously the self-esteem of the child, the impact on their self-esteem of having to repeat a year. It's also, socially and emotionally, so there's consequences around that. But quite often when a child is struggling at a point in school, it's because they need specific support and intervention. So therefore, the act of just repeating a year doesn't in itself provide that support and intervention. A more appropriate intervention is for a child to progress with their peers and receive appropriate support and intervention, and that might be interventions such as one-to-one support, small group support, additional classes. There's many interventions that are much more effective than a child repeating a year. And the Education Endowment Foundation in particular, they would note that repeating a year is very, very rare, because very few of the interventions that we do have a negative impact, and this does. And actually OECD have called for the practice of repetition to be banned internationally. They're so strong on it that they feel it's such a poor approach that they don't think it should be implemented internationally at all.
I wish it was in time for my education. I get the repeat years. Like repeated year, Queen should have been banned before I got there. Tammy, listen, I forgot to say as the outset, you are doing really important work. So well done in getting this bill to the place where it can be law in time for next September. That's phenomenal, and I can tell by your contributions, you're all very passionate about this, and you're over the detail. You understand the issue implicitly. I want to say well done to Belfast Mum. Belfast Mum made me aware of this issue. I was totally oblivious to this being an actual a matter that concerned parents and families. So Belfast Mum, thank you. I want to applaud the work of early years in terms of Sure Start. I'm experiencing that myself now, and I feel really sad that I discovered at this committee that not all parents have access, and that's a real inequality that needs addressed really, really urgently. What's your understanding? And another item I came aware of reading the book Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers is Birth Month and the impact of Birth Month on how well pupils do. What's your assessment of what how important Birth Month is?
So I think that underlies most of the proposals that you see before you, because there is clear evidence that children who are young for year perform less well in tests and assessment throughout their school career. That tends to be wider at the beginning of their school career and narrow as they get older. But it is still there, and it is still statistically significant by the time they're doing their GCSEs here at age 16. Our benchmark, obviously we use the 5 GCSEs, including English and Maths. So children born in May and June would perform about 5.4 percentage points lower than children born in July and August. So you can see it. It's there. It's statistically significant. Now, the positive part of it is that research has shown that these persistent differences in educational attainment throughout school don't actually lead to persistent differences in lifelong outcomes for children who are young for year. So by the time they reach adulthood and you look at these children in middle age, there's no particular differences in terms of income and career and mental health or anything like that for young for year children vis-a-vis their peers who were older in the years. So persistent differences throughout school, and that's what our proposals are designed to address. It's an issue that parents have brought to us and that we've been cognizant of in making these proposals, because they're evidence-based. It's not just a matter of some parents want this, so it's being done. It's a matter of the educational outcomes for young for year children on average are poorer than for children who are older within the class or year. So it's a clear phenomenon both domestically in Northern Ireland, across the UK and internationally.
Okay, folks, listen, thank you very much for your time today, and hope this bill gets delivered in time as you've all committed towards achieving. So well done. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Justin. Can I bring in Harry Harvey, MLA, please?
Okay, and thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Suzanne and your team there. Excellent work, and I have to praise the department for getting this all through, and it's going to be implemented. It's brilliant. Can I also say the consultation, like 88% agreeing with it and positive. Can I say I also agree? I think that's amazing. I think it's absolutely great. And to follow on a wee bit from what Pat said about the preschool, Pat was asking, about children with a statement, or I think he didn't start out as that, but I think How would it be if a parent sent their child to the preschool and then decided maybe after a week or after a month, no, it's not for them, I will hold them back a year because they have actually registered? Will they be penalised, or could they pull them out after a week or a month and then apply again the next year for that free year? Or would the fact that they have actually registered, would that be recorded and then they would pay the price later on? Could you tell me that?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's important to say that preschool isn't compulsory, so any parent is at liberty at any time to remove their child from preschool in a way that they wouldn't be obviously for primary school, because it's not a compulsory part of education. I think the issue is we have to draw a line somewhere, and if a child registers for preschool and is in receipt of a funded place, our position would be they couldn't receive a funded place for second year if they decided to defer school entry, but the parent would have freedom to still defer their child's entry, and I hope that makes sense. You know, they still wouldn't have to start year one at the age of 4. They can defer entry to year one until the age of 5. I think as well I probably should say this is the highest priority for the Minister in terms of her legislative priorities. We are working extremely hard to bring the bill forward. Obviously, implementation does depend on executive agreement, on accelerated passage, and on working through the stages of the legislative process within the Assembly. But we're fully committed and working at pace to bringing forward the bill very early in the new year.
Mm-hmm. That's great. But on your answer, the first answer, that if they have registered, then they couldn't go through it again the next year. So that would basically mean not that they would lose 2 years, but nearly, because if they were took out after a week or a month, then they couldn't attend, or they wouldn't attend the rest of that year, and they wouldn't be eligible for the next year. But obviously, if they paid, they probably could. Would that be right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously any private preschool or daycare arrangement's obviously a matter for the parent, and obviously that would be, I mean, I understand the point you're making, and it is a difficult scenario, but unfortunately we can't cater for every eventuality. We're trying to create a system that works fair and equitably for all children, and we want to make sure that children start preschool at the right time when it's age and stage appropriate for them, and there's a big onus on us to support parents and to educate parents to make sure that they're making informed decisions and that they have all the information. So that's an important aspect of these proposals, that we work with colleagues in CCEA to make sure that the information, and the Education Authority, to make sure the information is there for parents to help them and support them so they don't get into that position where they feel they've made the wrong choice for their child.
Yep, totally understand. I know it's great the government do provide a 1 year preschool place there for all children, so that's good. But I'm sure, like myself, you'll understand if some parents register their child for a week, they'll be up in arms, but we're used to that. So, yep, that's great. I know it has to be a cut-off at some stage and has to be some sort of rules, but thank you, Suzanne. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Harry. And thanks for that briefing. And obviously the schedule is tight. The legislation would have routinely passed via the Education Committee. Obviously, for it to pass, it will need accelerated passage. Is it possible to informally engage with the department on the legislation at the earliest possible stage to help ensure that a decision to support accelerated passage is as informed as possible?
Well, I think we're still working on the legislation. It's still very much work in progress, and I can come back to the chair whenever we get to a stage where the legislation, is more formally constituted and drafted. At the stage where we are at a very early stage, we also need to make sure that our final bill takes account of the findings of the public consultation, because it would be premature if it didn't. So we need to make sure that when we're engaging with the committee, we've taken account of the consultation findings as well.
Okay. I mean, sorry, Alistair, go ahead there.
I was just going to make the point that it's normal in that accelerated passage procedure that the committee will get.
Apologies, Adrian. I don't know where I'm getting off from, Adrian. So it's been a long morning. Apologies.
It's normal practice in that accelerated passage procedure to give the committee a sight of that at the time that the executive or have made have approved the policy side of that. So we'll obviously want to do that at an early stage, and then Minister will come to the committee and seek the committee's permission to go via accelerated passage and explain, and you have another further opportunity at that point when you will have had sight of a draft bill, etc. So, we will give as much opportunity as we possibly can, knowing that it is a very, very tight schedule.
I think as well, it is important to say that there's a legislative crispness to what we're proposing. We're proposing to increase compulsory school age for children born in April, May and June, so that they won't reach compulsory school age until the 1st of August after their 5th birthday, and to do a commensurate amendment at the other end, and I hope that makes sense. So, it's relatively clean. It doesn't involve defining different groups or anything like that. It's quite a clean change. So hopefully, it should be something that flows quite naturally from the policy proposals, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think this committee gave you a commitment a long time ago that if there was any way for legislation of this nature, however much we would wish it to be more comprehensive, for us to cooperate with you in terms of accelerated passage. So yeah, Adrian, helpful update there in terms of what the process looks like. Obviously, we wouldn't want to be entirely irresponsible in terms of some degree of due process and consideration of what the actual bill reads like. But we gave you that commitment some time ago, and we'll stick to it. I had a fairly legislatively crisp private member's proposal myself, Suzanne, but I still don't manage to have navigated the labyrinth of the Assembly legislation process, unfortunately. But hopefully you guys will have more authority and more power than I have at my disposal to get this one through. And look, like I say, if any informal engagement is helpful along the way, our commitment on this issue has always been to work in cooperation with you to try and make sure that it is delivered, because there is a strong lobby and strong evidence, as you've said, not least for this particular provision. Belfast Mom, Tiny Life have all been mentioned for work across a number of years, and obviously the department has been working on this for a number of years as well, to be fair. So thank you for the work that you've done, and we'll certainly be in a state of readiness to respond to the different stages as they progress for you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Chair.
Okay, can I ask broadcasting to remove witnesses and add members back to the spotlight, and ask Clark to summarise actions further to that briefing? Thanks.
Chair, I think the members were probably content and surprised to see that was actually going to be manageable, this mandate, and that really the committee's just keeping a watching brief then.
The Department of Education can move expeditiously when it wants to. It's a revelation.
And you can give a wee bit of praise to the Minister, Chair, for once.
I thought it did. I thought I was pretty positive there. Look, I imagine there will be detail to engage with more formally than we have at this initial stage, and undoubtedly any bill will not be as comprehensive as some would like it to be, but I can understand that it is positive to enact some change on some of these key policy areas. And as I said, the committee had given the department the commitment some time ago now that should this be possible via accelerated passage, given the amount of consultation that has occurred previously on these specific issues, that we would do that. So no, yeah, sorry, Harry, I'm having to adjust physiologically to something being done and to know what to say in response to it. But I agree with you, positive, really positive, and lots of families across Northern Ireland for whom that would be a real step forward. So I agree with you, Harry, absolutely. And, you know, many of us make the case that it is infinitely better having a functional executive and a functional assembly in place working on these issues that pertain to people in this region. So I'm glad that hopefully this will be a good example of evidence of that argument. Members, any other comments before I round this up?
Chair, can I just say, I mean, I think it is one that is all positive. It is a good news story, and I mean, we don't always get that. So, yep, indeed. Appreciate that said. Thank you.
We just need to get that bill over the line, Harry, when it comes forward, and we've looked at it. We might be in the assembly chamber at 2:30 a.m. some nights, so you can bring the reinforcements for us.
No problem.
No problem. Okay, members. Any other business? No. Thanks for the active participation today. We've covered a fair few issues there this morning. So, Clark, the date and time of our next formal meeting is tomorrow at 9 a.m. Is that right? Do you want to remind us in relation to that? That's our first evidence session on the Free Period Products Bill, and importantly, it's with Homeless Period Belfast, yeah, and the Period Poverty Project, yeah. Really important session for us to make tomorrow morning then. Okay, members.
Can I just say, Chair and Evan, I'll probably not be able to attend tomorrow morning again because of obviously commitments to the DAERA committee.
Understand that, Harold. Clark, maybe it's worth just emailing a reminder to everybody about that meeting and the agenda items therein, and we'll get on with that important work as well then. Okay, members?
Everybody.
Thanks. Okay, the committee meeting does now adjourn. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Assembly, Senate Chamber, Programme Sound.